For college students, summer represents a break, an opportunity to relax, enjoy the warm weather, and create lasting memories with friends and family. It's a time to unwind, free from the stress of schoolwork and exams, at least for a couple of months. Many students seize the chance to take on a summer job, and that's exactly what a 19-year-old from Kansas City did in the summer of 2002. She landed a position as a pool attendant, eager to soak up the sun and mingle with others. Little did she know, this seemingly carefree job would soon set the stage for her tragic death. Now, you'll hear a chilling tale of a brutal murder, a heartbreaking loss for a family that never imagined something so horrific could happen to them, and a twist of fate that no one could have predicted. But you'll also hear about a community united in grief, a determined investigative team, and most of all, a father who refused to let his daughter's murder fade into obscurity. He dedicated himself relentlessly to finding the killer and ensuring justice was served. This story isn't just about a senseless crime, it's about a father's unwavering love and his fight for justice. This is the story of Ollie Kemp. Ollie Kemp was born on October 11, 1982 in Leawood, Kansas, to Kathy and Roger Kemp. They named her Alexandra Elizabeth, a name that means compassionate one and helper of mankind. Ollie's dad said the day she was born was the happiest and luckiest day of his life. He called her Princess. Allie was definitely a daddy's girl. Roger and Kathy raised her in Leawood, alongside her two younger brothers, Tyler and Drew. Leawood is a bedroom community, an affluent part of Kansas City in the suburbs. People left their garage doors unlocked and open. Kids roamed freely, and they didn't think about crime. It was a safe place for Roger and Kathy to raise their three children, and the entire Kemp family was very happy there. Allie was also very close to her grandparents, who she affectionately referred to as Grammy and Gramps. When Ollie was born, they decided their granddaughter deserved a special gift. They searched high and low for the perfect present that would reflect their love for her. Finally, they found a beautiful Precious Moments Bible. If you've never heard of Precious Moments, they're known for their collectible, cute little dolls and figurines that were popular in the 80s and 90s. The Precious Moments Bible was not just any Bible, but a special book filled with pictures of the characters, especially catered to children. As Allie grew up, she cherished this gift. It became a prized possession, a keepsake she held onto for many years. From the moment Ollie could speak, she exhibited a thirst for knowledge. Whether Ollie was asking why the sky was blue or why birds could fly, her endless curiosity excited her father. Whenever Ollie asked why, Roger became excited to answer all of her questions. He loved engaging with Ollie and teaching her about life and the world around her. Allie flourished in Leawood, and as she grew up, she became known around the community for her kindness, involvement, and bright megawatt smile. In middle school, Allie was voted the nicest girl in the 8th grade. In high school at Blue Valley North, Allie was elected to the Sweetheart Court in her junior year and appeared in the yearbook a whopping 13 times. She was a student ambassador, served on the student council, played varsity soccer, and was a member of the National Honor Society, where she was elected Sergeant of Arms and co-president of Future Business Leaders of America in her senior year. Her dad said that she loved high school and participated in everything. He said that she was into 19 different things in school. Allie's mom, Kathy, said that Allie had it all in one package. She wasn't perfect by any means, but she knew where she was going. No matter how busy Ollie got, she never lost her kindness. She always made time for those she cared about most. Allie had a lot of close friends who described her in ways that I have to share with you. Her friend Ashley said that, while being involved with so many things, one would think you would get too wrapped up and forget what's really important in life. But that was never the case with Allie. She always had time to say hello, or at least give you a smile. Sta knew Allie as one of the few people who, at any given moment, would drop everything if you needed a friend. Jennifer, one of Allie's closest friends, said she was always very collected, had her head on straight, and you knew if you told her absolutely anything, you could trust her with it. Ollie would brighten everyone's day. Her friend Kristen looked forward to the fun that she had around Allie, who was described as even peppy in the mornings. There was never a dull moment with her. Even her guy friends took note of how happy she was. Louis said that Allie brought happiness everywhere she went, and you wouldn't even remember her ever being in a bad mood. She lived her life with no regrets. Allie was known to be popular and really smart, but she remained grounded and sweet. I think the best way this could be described is when her friend Isaac said, "Think of a blinding light shining brilliantly in the sky. Now put that same brilliance in a person." That's Allie. And I know it sounds cliché, but in Allie's case, she was really the type of person who would light up a room. Allie graduated from Blue Valley North in May of 2001, bringing her light and happiness to nearby Kansas State University. Allie showed the same drive and kindness in college that she did in high school. She joined the Pi Beta Kappa sorority, where she met some of her closest friends. She quickly became an involved member of the sorority and was elected as the chapter's Pan-Hellenic representative. Allie's pledge mother, Erin O'Brien, knew Allie as a bright woman who took on leadership roles in the sorority right away and seemed to get along with everyone. She said that nobody would have hated her. Nobody. But Allie wasn't just involved in her sorority. She was also dedicated to her schoolwork. In her freshman year, she finished in the top 10% of her class and was invited to join the honors program at Kansas State, as well as the National Society of Collegiate Scholars. She was also an academic scholar in the School of Human Ecology and a leadership scholar. Additionally, she played intramural soccer and basketball. Even though Allie wasn't in Leawood anymore, she didn't forget the relationships she had there. She called her mom almost every day, and Kathy said that was just who she was. She wanted her family to be involved in her life, to be a big part of it. One time, Allie was home from college and asked her mom to join her for lunch with some of her friends. As Kathy watched Allie cross the street, dressed casually but cute and sporting a ponytail, she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for being the mother of such a beautiful young woman. Allie's beauty attracted many admirers, but her heart belonged to one person. That was Phil Howes, her high school boyfriend, who was attending a different college at the time. They were pretty serious. They even talked about a future together, but they were both still just freshmen in college, and they both wanted to experience college before settling down. Allie met Phil during gym class, their first year at Blue Valley North High School. Their connection was instant, and they quickly became inseparable. Their love only grew stronger over the years. One Valentine's Day, Phil pulled out all the stops and arranged a special dinner for Allie. Despite his very poor cooking skills, Phil put his heart and soul into the meal, even getting his entire family to go out of the house so he could have a moment alone with Allie. And as the night unfolded, Phil's spaghetti dinner turned out to be less than perfect. The noodles were overcooked, the sauce was bland, and the garlic bread was soggy. But despite the culinary mishaps, Allie was determined to make Phil feel loved and appreciated. She ate every bite, even insisting that the meal was perfect because she thought Phil was at least perfect for her. And if that love remained strong, then maybe they would end up together in the future. They believed they had all the time in the world to spend the rest of their lives together, if only they would have known how little time they really had left. Allie and her friends traveled to Florida for spring break in May of 2002. They spent their nights sitting around together, sharing stories and reflecting on their lives. It was a time for laughs and bonding, as well as reminiscing about their adventures and accomplishments in the last few months of their lives in the first year of college. During one of the heartfelt conversations, Allie made a comment that stuck with her friends. She told them that if she had to live her life over again, she would live it exactly the same way that she had. No regrets. Her statement struck a chord with her friends, who couldn't help but admire how confident Allie was, how she lived in the present, embracing each moment like it could be her last. And Allie's words would become a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the unpredictable nature of fate. Later that summer in 2002, Allie returned home from college for her break. She was staying with her family in their home in Leawood. She, her brother, and her boyfriend Phil all got jobs at the local Foxborough pool on 123rd Street and State Line Road. This pool was exclusively for Foxborough and Hunter Ridge residents. It's a popular, family-friendly spot to hang out in the summer if you're in the Leawood area. Ali was excited to spend her first summer home from college with her family, her friends, and her boyfriend. She was really looking forward to her new job lifeguarding and being a pool attendant. It offered several advantages, including being close to home, the opportunity to work outside, enjoy the weather, work on her tan, and interact with her coworkers, neighbors, and friends. Ali was also responsible for setting everyone's schedule, and that was a plus. Roger Kemp, Ali's father, was also excited to have Ali back at home. Jennifer W., Ali's good friend, said that Ali was her dad's princess, and princess in the most beautiful way, because she was kind, sweet, and adored her parents. Roger had worked hard for many years to build the beautiful life he shared with his family in Kansas. Roger was born in Missouri in 1945, and after high school, he worked for several years as a painter at Ford Motor Company, painting the undercarriages of cars 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. He worked all day in the pit, with cars rolling on top of him, but he was determined to build a better life for himself. Roger enrolled at Central Missouri State University, and after graduation, he moved to the Kansas City area and started a company called Quality Plastic Systems with a friend, which they operated together for 40 years. On January 27, 1979, Roger married Kathy, and together they had 3 children. Ali in 1982, then Tyler in December of 1984, and 2 years later in 1986, another son, Andrew, who went by Drew. Roger worked hard, and because of that, he was able to afford a very nice lifestyle for his family. Their home was at 12,000 Mission Road in Leawood, and to me, it is a mansion. It had 7 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, white pillars, tall archways in the front of the house, a brick exterior, a garden in the front, and beautiful marble floors throughout. It's just under 11,000 square feet. The ceilings are expansive, the windows in the living room are from the floor to the roof, and there's a balcony overlooking that living room from the 2nd floor. Everything about it is grand. There's an outdoor fireplace on an upstairs outdoor balcony. It's like a castle. There's a full bar, an entertainment area with a foosball table, and a pinball machine. On Zillow, it's described as a remarkable home, and it truly is. The Kemps were very lucky but grateful to live there. Roger loved taking care of his family and being a dad. He was especially active in his kids' athletic pursuits. He coached and managed baseball, basketball, and soccer teams. Roger's friend said that if there was a picture in the dictionary next to the word perseverance, it would be a picture of Roger Kemp. When something didn't go as planned, Kathy always said, "Don't they know they're dealing with Roger Kemp?" Unfortunately, Roger's determination would soon be tested in a way that he never expected. A dad like Ali's should be protected at all costs, and you will know why. Let's jump to the summer when Ali was home from college. It was June 18th, 2002, which began like any other day. Phil, Ali's boyfriend, was working the morning shift. He opened the Foxborough pool, and Ali was set to come in later in the day, relieving Phil and taking over the pool by herself. Around 2 p.m., she was set to work until 5 o'clock, when she would hand over her shift to her brother Tyler. That day, it was unseasonably chilly outside, breezy and overcast, so there wasn't anyone else at the pool when Ali arrived. Phil informed her that, because of the chilly weather, no one had actually been at the pool all day during his shift. After Phil left Ali around 2:15 to start her shift, he went to his second job. Around 2:50, Ali called her best friend, who lived nearby, and asked her to stop by the pool and hang out to keep her company. A minute later, Ali called Phil to check in about their date planned for that night, but Phil didn't pick up the phone, so she left him a voicemail. Ali's friend arrived at the pool around 3:15. She pulled through the parking lot and right up to the gate where the pool was. Since she knew that no one else would be at the pool except for Ali, she figured Ali would be easy to spot. But she didn't see her anywhere in sight. Being a teenager, Ali's friend didn't feel like making the effort to get out of her car and go looking for her. Instead, she just kept honking the horn, acting really silly and loud to get Ali's attention. But to her surprise, Ali never emerged from inside the gate. Instead, a man peeked out from the pool house, dressed in coveralls and carrying a bucket. He waved at Ali's friend, and she panicked because she thought this man was Ali's boss. She was worried she might have just gotten Ali in trouble for making all that noise outside and coming to her work while she was on duty. So, she quickly drove away. Then, a little before 5 p.m., Ali's brother arrived at the pool to take over the last bit of Ali's shift so she could go home in time to get ready for her date with Phil. He saw Ali's car, a black Jeep Cherokee, parked in the spot near the front gate. But when Ali's brother Tyler arrived and was inside the pool area, his sister was nowhere to be found. Ali's bag, phone, car keys, and all her personal belongings were on a table poolside. Although Tyler searched all around the pool, he couldn't find any trace of her. At first, he didn't think much of it. He assumed maybe she had run across the street to a local store and gotten something to eat. But then he looked at the pool maintenance schedule board, where each attendant has to mark off the tasks they complete on their shift. He noticed that none of Ali's tasks were checked off. That struck him as odd since he knew his sister to be very responsible. It really didn't make sense that, since 2 p.m., Ali wouldn't have gotten anything done. She was supposed to test the water at 2 p.m. and 4 p.m., skim the pool at 2:30 and 4:30, tidy up the restrooms at 3:30, and straighten up the lawn chairs and poolside loungers by 5 o'clock, and none of it was completed. Now this was a cause for concern. He quickly called his mom, Kathy, and let her know that he didn't see Ali at the pool. He asked if she was already at home, but she wasn't. It was in that moment, around 5:20 p.m., that Roger walked through his front door at home to find his wife on the phone with Tyler, at which point Kathy informed Roger that they didn't know where Ali was. Roger didn't waste a second. He jumped back in his car and raced over to the pool, which was only about 1.5 miles away from their home. He arrived around 5:25 p.m., and Tyler was standing at the gate waiting. Once inside the pool area, Roger saw Ali's cell phone, her water bottle, her bag, and books. All of her belongings were neatly placed on the table outside, just like Tyler had described. However, there were no signs of Ali anywhere. Roger glanced around the entire pool area. He even looked in the deep end of the pool because he wondered if somehow she'd had an accident, fallen in the water, and become unconscious at the bottom. But she wasn't there. He even checked the baby pool, which was only a couple feet deep. But again, nothing. He looked everywhere around the pool grounds, searching all the bathrooms in the pool house, but Ali wasn't inside. Finally, he walked into the pump room. The room was dark and cluttered, and it was hard to see. Roger didn't think this was where his daughter would be, but he went inside just to be sure. He looked all around, behind the pumps, and he was about to leave. But then he noticed a blue tarp lying on the floor. Leaning in closer, he saw what looked like a leg sticking out from underneath the tarp. I cannot imagine what flashed through Roger's mind in that moment. What reorientation of his world took place in those short seconds. Up until that point, he'd probably been hoping that there was an innocent reason for Ali's absence, that he would find her in the parking lot with a friend, in the bathroom getting ready for her date, or grabbing equipment in the pump room. But when he ripped the tarp up, all of those hopes vanished. All possibilities of an easy explanation disappeared because he found Ali. But this wasn't the way anyone would want to find their loved one. She was lying face down on the ground, her hair matted with blood. There was blood all over her. He could see she was black and blue all over her body. He could immediately see that she had been beaten very badly. He gently rolled her over, and when he did, he could not believe how brutal it was. He grabbed a hold of her hand and noticed it was cold, and despite the horror and sadness that I'm sure he felt in this moment, Roger jumped into action. He called 911 immediately. I'm going to play a portion of it for you, but first, let me tell you what he said, in case for any reason it's not clear. Roger told the 911 operator, "I think my daughter has been murdered." The operator asked him why he thought that, and he said, "She's not moving, she's laying in the pool house, she's got blood all over her, and she has been red. I can't say the word, but I will play that portion for you now."
Layman 911, what is your emergency?
I think my daughter's been murdered.
Okay, why do you think that, sir?
Because she's
not moving. And she's laying in the pool house. How old is she? She's 19. Okay, stay on the phone. And she's got blood all over. Okay. Stay on the phone. Do not hang up. I'm going to go ahead and get fire and ambulance on the phone also, okay? I need them here now. Oh, Allie. Oh, Allie. Hi, honey. Honey. Allie, stay with us. Stay with us. Are you there? Allie, come back. Allie, come to us. Allie. Does it appear that she's breathing? I can't tell.
The operator repeatedly asked Roger to stay on the phone with her and promised that help was on the way. Throughout the call, you can hear Roger begging his daughter to stay alive, to come back, to keep fighting. And I can just picture Roger holding his daughter, pleading for a life that was probably already gone. He wanted to speak to his daughter. He wanted her to tell him who did this to her. He needed to know if there was any consciousness still left inside her. He was holding out hope that she would somehow come to, but she wasn't moving. Roger told the operator he couldn't tell whether she was breathing. Roger explained what it was like to find his daughter, and that was truly heartbreaking.
When I found her and I rolled her over, I couldn't believe how brutal it was.
Police and paramedics arrived within minutes. Homicide detectives Joe Langer, Sergeant Scott Henson, and Chief Deputy Craig Hill of the Leawood Police Department were also sent out. And when they first saw Allie, they were shocked by the apparent violence with which she had been attacked. Chief Deputy Craig Hill said, "I have to say that in my 35 years of experience, it was probably the most horrific thing." And just like Roger, the paramedics said they couldn't believe how brutal her injuries were. There was a pool of blood under the back of her head, her face was swollen, and Allie's shirt and bra had been pulled up around her neck, exposing her chest area. Her shorts and underwear were missing. There was also a ligature mark around her neck. Several of her fingers were broken, and a few of her fingernails had been snapped off. Police said it was clear from Allie's injuries that she put up quite a fight. She had severe blunt force trauma to her head and face. EMTs couldn't find a pulse, but rigor mortis had not set in, so they attempted life-saving measures. A heart machine was also brought in an attempt to resuscitate Allie, but they could not find the necessary heart rhythm to use it. So Allie was rushed to the hospital, where she was joined by her family and her boyfriend Phil. Unfortunately, a couple of hours after she was admitted, a doctor and a nurse came out to speak with Allie's loved ones. The doctor informed them that he had done everything he could, but he couldn't save Allie's life. She was gone. She didn't make it. Losing your daughter at only 19 years old is impossible to fathom, but losing her in this way, seeing her body covered in bruises and injuries that would force you to imagine her terrifying last moments of life, is unimaginable. I don't know how anyone could bear that. But Roger knew he had to stay strong for his little girl. He actually decided to spend the entire night at the morgue with her. He said there was no way he was going to leave her alone. I've never heard of anyone doing this, and it truly shows how much this father adored his daughter. He wanted one last moment with his daughter who had been taken too soon. Seeing this father's face, knowing the brutality that he had to witness, a lot of times we might forget that we're talking about real people who had to see these things happen to the people they love so much. Back at the scene, investigators began the painstaking task of cataloging evidence. Chief Hill said, "The best way I could describe this pump room is that it looked like a grenade had gone off in the building. You had a jigsaw of evidence in there, and it was going to take every tool you had to go in there and detail it, recover it, and rebuild it. There was stuff everywhere. You could tell how badly Allie was fighting to survive by how much stuff was out of place and thrown all over. There were pool equipment, pool noodles, trash bags, hoses, pumps, barrels of cleaning chemicals, ladders, tarps, and pool rafts. Just lots of stuff to sift through. But they focused on the area where Allie had been lying and then moved outward. Crime scene technicians collected Allie's flip-flops, which were in 2 different parts of the pump room. They took swabs of the blood spatter and the blood pooling. But there was something that stood out. A first aid kit, which was normally kept on one of the shelves, had been dumped onto the floor. One of the items inside was a tube of antibiotic ointment, and it was lying right beside where Ali was found. Its cap was off, and upon closer inspection, it appeared that there was blood on the tube and on the end of the cap. It was almost as though someone opened it to use it, or maybe they just stepped on it in the struggle and the top flew off. They couldn't be sure, but either way, it was swabbed and collected for analysis. Police also collected swabs from Ali's remaining clothing. Meanwhile, almost immediately after Ali's death, the news of her murder began to spread like wildfire through the small community. Local media was all over the story, and soon, every news station was running it. This meant it didn't take long for residents of Leawood to hear the news. They were shocked. They were blindsided. One community member described it as a horrible, horrible nightmare. Of course, Ali's family didn't understand who could have done something like this. What started as a beautiful summer day turned into a nightmare that they could not wake up from. It was terrifying to think that this happened in broad daylight at the local pool in a safe neighborhood. The pure brazenness of this crime really left the locals feeling very afraid. Nothing like this had ever happened there. Friends and neighbors began to gather at the entrance of the Fox Barrow pool to pay their respects, leaving flowers and mementos. One friend said that everyone knew Ali. She was so popular. No one could believe that this happened to her. They also couldn't believe it because she was so cautious. She wouldn't let friends walk to their cars by themselves. She was very aware of her surroundings. She was intelligent when it came to her own safety, and it seemed so unreal that this could have happened. The very next day, Ali's friends and family held a vigil for her, and Roger said that they received so much support, tremendous support from the Kansas City community. Churches, prayer circles, and synagogues, it felt like everyone had adopted Ali as their own. Ali's friends and family also created a website called Ali Forever, in which people could share memories and art in honor of Ali. Friends even wrote poems remembering her and grieving their loss. Roger said that, in the wake of Ali's killing, everything reminded him of his daughter. When he touched a bouquet of flowers, for a moment he thought of his daughter's hair. He said that when the family ate mashed strawberries, all he could think about was how much he loved his daughter and how much she loved mashed strawberries. He remembered how Ali was always curious, asking, "Why this, Dad? Why that?" Roger was now thinking that she was asking about her death, saying, "Why, Dad?" That was what everyone wanted to know, why. On Saturday, June 22nd, 4 days after Ali's murder, her family held her funeral service at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Leawood. Over 1,400 people attended the funeral, many of them wearing lavender and white ribbons in her memory. Ali was buried with her Precious Moments Bible that was given to her by her Grammy and Gramps. When they placed that Bible with Ali's body, it fell open to a picture with a caption. The caption said, "No tears inside the gates." It was from Revelation 21 verse 4. I don't know if it means anything to you, but you can take it as you will, and I'm sure her family did as well. That's why they mentioned it at the service. Ali's parents said, as we said in your high school yearbook, "Having you in our lives has been an absolute thrill. You didn't get the chance to become everything you could be, and that is a huge loss. We always said you were a precious angel from heaven, and now you have gone home. You filled a space in us we didn't know we were missing until we had you. But now we are left with a hole in our hearts. We love you so much, our brown-eyed girl. We'll never forget you. One short year ago, we cried over letting you go to college. Now, as we finally have to let you go, may angels lead you into paradise. We thank God for you and your life." Reverend Alan Hamilton also spoke, and he described Ali as cheerful, naturally smart, radiant, amazing, and unusually loving. He talked about how people flocked to her and reminisced on her trademark snort when she laughed, her teasing of her little brothers, and how she would shout with joy when she was excited. He recounted how, as a child, she had written her grandmother little notes expressing her love for her. She continued the tradition in college, writing her classmates at Kansas State encouraging notes. He ended by saying, "There is a terrible evil thing that has happened. It's left a huge hole in our lives, but evil does not and cannot and should not be the final word. There is goodness in you. Ali showed you that. She lived for you, and that's the word that has to prevail. After the service, Ali was buried at Mount Moriah Cemetery. Ali's tombstone was engraved with a poem that she wrote herself called True Friends. The poem reads, "A true friend listens to what you say. Life's a sculpture. Friends are clay. Friends are notes to life's great song. A melody that carries you along. Whether it's joy or fear, whenever life is hard, they're near. In a world of darkness, friends are light. So thank your lucky stars tonight. When life gets hard and goals seem far, it's then you'll know who your true friends are." How true that really is. So many in Leawood and beyond found a true friend in Ali. But as much as this community mourned Ali's loss, they were clamoring for police to identify her killer. Everyone was desperate for law enforcement to bring this perpetrator to justice, for Ali's sake, and before he could strike again. Law enforcement was also anxious to locate the killer as quickly as possible. Leawood police contacted the Kansas City Metro Squad, who sent some of their elite team to join the Leawood force. In all, there were about 20 detectives working overtime on this case. Next, the investigators were analyzing the results of Ali's autopsy. Dr. Michael Handler, a forensic neuropathologist, performed this autopsy. He's board certified in atomic pathology, neuropathology, and forensic pathology, and he concluded that Ali had suffered both ligature and manual strangulation. But this is the worst part. Ali was not strangled quickly. Because of the petechial hemorrhaging, which is when the capillaries under the skin break and leak blood, creating these tiny red, brown, and purple spots, Dr. Handler believed it had likely taken the killer somewhere between 10 and 16 minutes to strangle Ali to death. There were also periods of time when the killer paused and then started again. Both of Ali's eyes were black and blue, her lip was cut, and I couldn't even count how many wounds she sustained on her head and her face from the report I read and the depiction I observed. Her arms were bruised and scraped. She had bruising on her back, and her hands, especially her fingers and knuckles, were all cut. The fingers of her left hand were contorted and broken. She also had bruises on her face, both of her hip bones, her knees, feet, and her upper thighs. There were also 2 lacerations on the back of Ali's head, which could have been caused by her fall, or someone beating her over the head, or her head hitting the floor. These injuries alone speak to the horrific, gruesome fight. The fact that the killer attacked her so horrifically and then dragged out those last painful minutes is absolutely sickening. One thing that could not be confirmed, though, was whether she had been forced into intercourse, although it seemed, from how she was found unclothed from the neck down, that it was definitely the motive. The time of death was narrowed down to between 2:51 p.m., after Ali made that last call to Phil, and 5 p.m., when her brother Tyler arrived at the pool. After the autopsy and detailing of the crime scene, police turned their attention to those closest to Ali. It is hard to think about, but in murders as brutal as this one, the victim almost always knows their killer. The brutality says this wasn't random, this was personal. Police collected DNA samples from Ali's brothers, her father, and her boyfriend Phil. All of them willingly provided the samples. Roger had told the police that Phil was a sweet guy, a good kid who loved Ali, and that there was no way he was involved. Phil also had a decent alibi. After leaving Foxborough Pool, he had gone to work at another pool, then gone to a friend's house and played video games until he got the call that Ali was rushed to the hospital. His whereabouts were confirmed by those who were seen with him, but they still needed to be sure. By now, the swabs collected from the ointment tube and Ali's shirt and bra proved to be blood. But it wasn't just Ali's blood. It was a mixture of hers and a male's DNA. Considering she put up such a fight, they concluded this must be the killer's blood. When they ran the DNA, it allowed them to build a partial male DNA profile. Unfortunately, the sample wasn't clean enough or complete enough to upload to the National DNA Database. But police believed the sample they had could still be enough to match it with the killer's DNA. They just had to track someone down, get their sample, and then compare it. So, they were going to need some suspects. But Roger turned out to be right. It wasn't Phil. When the DNA samples were tested, none of the DNA they collected so far matched the killer's profile. Phil, who was grief-stricken and angry, told the police everything he knew. He He said, to his knowledge, Ali had no enemies. He didn't know anyone who would want to hurt her, let alone kill her. All he knew was that sometimes Ali got a little creeped out when she was at the pool by herself. The detectives asked him why, and Phil explained that Ali had mentioned to him that there were some men who had been watching her. They were lawn and garden workers who maintained the pool grounds and the surrounding condominiums. She told Phil that sometimes they stared at her and made her uncomfortable. Even the day she was killed, Ali didn't want Phil to leave, so he stuck around for a bit before he left for his second lifeguarding job. She wanted him to be there in case the workers were around, but they weren't in sight, so she said it was okay for him to go. The police followed this lead and reached out to the lawn and garden group. Although they didn't find any likely suspects among the employees, these interviews yielded the first big break in this case. The workers told police that the day before Ali's murder, when they were mowing the lawn, they saw a man lurking around in the bushes outside the pool with a camera or binoculars. They thought he appeared to be looking at the girls sunbathing. Then they said that on the day of Ali's murder, when they were on break, sitting in their truck in the pool parking lot, they saw a white male driving an early 1980s Ford pickup truck, circling the lot 3 or 4 times before driving away. This was their first big tip. So, police asked anyone who may have seen anything out of the ordinary to come forward. And that's when 3 teenage boys also said they saw something. They saw a man lurking in the bushes the day before the murder. Police then worked with all of their eyewitnesses to put together a sketch of their potential suspect. He was known to be a Caucasian male with a tan complexion, slender, maybe in his 30s or 40s, driving an early 1980s beige or tan Ford pickup truck. The sketch was released on June 22nd, and the tips started to pour in. Everyone wanted to help identify this man, but soon there would be not 1, but 2 police sketches of the possible suspect. And that's because, remember Ali's friend? She came forward, the one who was supposed to meet her at the pool that day. She drove away thinking she saw Ali's boss, but now she knew the man she saw was not Ali's boss. No one could account for who this man was or why he was there that day, so he rose to the top of the suspect list. The standard police procedure for developing a sketch is by using a kit of facial features, either on an overhead projector or a computer screen. But these kinds of tools lack tiny nuances. On top of that, Ali's friend was traumatized, and because of this, they were not able to put together a sketch that looked enough like the man she thought she saw. So, the police decided to bring in a woman named Lee Hammond, an expert sketch artist. She had retired at the time from freelance sketching, but she volunteered to return to the force to help with this case. Lee met with Roger Kemp, and she said that his passion and determination to find his daughter's killer made her want to help even more. She said the more she got to know Roger, the more his personal strength and character began to come out, and he became the personal spokesperson for every father out there. Sure enough, Lee was able to get a much better sketch from Ali's friend. They spent 3 hours together building the image of this unknown man that she had seen. She knew how important it was for her eyewitness account to be a part of this case. Lee started by asking Ali's friend to close her eyes and remember that day, to imagine the sights, the sounds, and the smells of the Foxborough pool. When they finished the image, Ali's friend said that every other composite made him look mean, but to her, he just looked sad. The finished sketch showed a white man in his 30s, somewhere between 5 feet 10 inches and 6 tall, with a heavy build. He had short brown hair and was wearing clothes that might have been overalls or a blue shirt and blue slacks. Immediately, Ali's friends and family jumped into action, doing everything they could to circulate these sketches, both of them which looked entirely different. The one from the lawn care workers and the teens had a more slim facial structure, whereas the one created by Ali's friend had a rounder face. Ali's boyfriend gathered a group of Ali's friends, and they traveled around town and the nearby suburbs, handing out these flyers with the 2 police sketches. Their plan was to distribute 10,000 flyers. Phil said they were going to go everywhere in the area where somebody could be from. While searching, the friends took a pause to hold hands and say the Lord's Prayer in remembrance of Ali. Lindsay Courtney, one of Ollie's friends, remembered that spring break trip to Florida when they had all been talking about things they wished they had done differently. Ollie said she had no regrets, that she would do it all again the exact same way, and at least they knew that Ollie had lived the life she wanted, even if it was cut short. While Phil and Ollie's friends worked to distribute flyers, Roger Kemp was working overtime to get Ollie's murder and the manhunt for her killer in the media. He wanted to spread the word as far as he could. You never know who might see the sketches or hear Ollie's story and know something, Roger said. I had to keep moving. I had to think about how I could catch this predator. I wasn't going to let him get away. Roger went on the news, talking to the media all the time. He even told the killer, "You will be caught." In another segment, he begged anyone who knew anything to come forward. Please call in those leads. You have a choice. You can stay in bed, pull the covers over your head, or you can get out and try to make something happen. Many of the reporters Roger met with remembered him to this day. One said Roger's face was the portrait of pain, but he just kept going. Amy Anderson, another reporter, said she remembered thinking that Roger Kemp was an amazing father because he was so driven to find who did this to his daughter. He was such a warrior and a champion for Ollie, and that is why I told you a father like this should be protected at all costs. He's the definition of what a father should be. Ollie loved him so much, and it was evident how much he loved her. He was never going to give up. Roger also offered a reward, hoping that monetary compensation might motivate someone to come forward with information. He raised $24,000, and then an additional $1,000 was contributed by the TIPS hotline. Amazingly, Kansas City provided $25,000 in matching funds from the city's contingency fund, bringing the total reward for any tips that led to an arrest to $50,000. Then, only 6 days after Ollie's murder, Roger Kemp went on the show America's Most Wanted. The family was hopeful that this show might lead to a major break in the case because just a couple of years before, back in 1993, the show had broadcast a 40-second segment about another murder of a young woman in Leawood, a Pittsburgh State University student named Stephanie Schmidt. 10 hours later, the murderer, Donald Ray Gideon, came forward, saying that he had seen the clip and wanted to turn himself in. If the show had worked to solve another murder, why not Ollie's? The episode aired on August 3rd at 8 p.m. and 10 to 12 million people watched that show each week. After the airing, the tips came flooding in. The show's director said that the calls that came in after this specific episode were the highest number of calls ever to result from a single episode. The police started to sift through all the tips, and Roger kept going. Like I said, he was never going to stop until the killer was found. Ollie's friend Jennifer said that Roger's energy was so inspiring and uplifting to her and many of Ollie's friends. That's what kept them going and kept them strong. I'm sure it was incredibly hard for Ollie's parents. I'm sure it would be for any parent. They had the most wonderful daughter, who was everything they could have ever imagined, and they were just minding their own business in life when something like this happens. Police were also inspired by Roger's efforts and matched his determination. They tracked every lead they could think of. Police Major Craig Hill said that the bottom line was they were going to turn over every single rock, and under one of those rocks, the suspect would be hiding. They were hopeful that it wouldn't take too much more time. Officers were working overtime at this point, getting special approval to work weekends, or stay in the office until midnight, or even until 2 a.m. Detectives sent an alert to the National Crime Information Center and the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. Leawood, Detective Ron High was put in charge of tracking the truck that had been seen at the pool, and he used computer records to search for every 1980 and 1981 Ford pickup registered in Kansas and Missouri. He said there were more than 300 in the metropolitan area alone. He also drove his wife crazy looking for tan pickup trucks wherever they went. He would see one and have to drive around the block to get the license plate number. Police also looked into sex offenders in the area, but none of them seemed to match the description of the man at the pool or could have been Ollie's killer, since they either had alibis or their DNA was not a match. Of course, The biggest chunk of investigators' time was spent running down every lead and tip that came in. When the second sketch came out, it generated over 100 tips in just one day. When America's Most Wanted generated even more, they followed up on each of them, checking to see if any of them led to a viable suspect. They checked up on many sightings of trucks, many sightings of people who supposedly looked like the sketch, but none of them were promising. But Roger Kemp had done his job well, and they had new tips every day to investigate and clear. People were calling in saying, "Oh, my neighbor looks like that sketch," or "My coworker looks like him." There were even people willing to turn over their relatives' clothing for DNA testing, saying that the sketch looked like them. That's progress, but still, there were no matches. Roger was convinced that if they didn't find this guy, he was going to kill someone else, so he didn't want this case to go cold. As a matter of fact, family members of victims aren't usually allowed to know everything that the police do. You've heard and seen this before, but in this case, since Roger was working so hard on his daughter's case, Major Hill pulled him aside and said, "Listen, you're going to be part of this investigation team. We're going to let you be privy to everything that we know." And finally, a tip came in that seemed like it might hold water. Someone called in and said they were suspicious of a guy named James Strader. The tipster said that James looked exactly like the sketch and might have a violent criminal record. Let me tell you, they weren't lying. The detectives really thought the sketch looked exactly like James, or could be his twin, or better yet, the same person, the killer. Other than the eyebrows, I can see it for the most part, but the sketch's brows looked more furrowed. However, we know that the shapes of eyebrows change when a person makes a certain expression. Ollie's friend did say that the man looked sad to her. Plus, James Strader drove an old pickup truck that resembled the one seen at the pool. He worked at a small auto repair shop in Olathe, Kansas, which is about a 20-minute drive from Leawood. Detectives immediately went to James's house, and he cooperated, answering all their questions. He denied having anything to do with Allie's murder. He said he was at work all day that day and told police they could just call his boss to verify. Police contacted James's boss, and he did back up his alibi, saying the two of them were working at the time of Ollie's murder and they were there all day long. He said there was no way James could have left without him knowing. Disappointed, but yet another dead end. Police returned to the drawing board and the ever-growing pile of tips. In the end, they decided not to collect James's DNA because it was expensive to do DNA testing, and his alibi was strong. But would someone lie for a killer? It's not unheard of, but they weren't going to take a chance. They applied for a warrant to search his truck, and inside they found a pair of women's underwear and some blood on one of the seats. For investigators, this seemed like a match they were looking for. They knew that Ollie's underwear were missing from the scene, and it had been a bloody crime scene, so no doubt some of that blood could have been transferred to the killer's vehicle. But what really made them think they had found the killer was what was written in a journal found inside that truck. Inside the journal, he wrote that he was the devil's child, and that maybe he wouldn't get caught for what he had done. If he did, he was going to take his life. So they definitely confronted him about the underwear and what he said in the book. At first he said, "Oh, they're my cousin's underwear." Yeah, he said that she left them in there. But then he changed his story and said he didn't know how they got there or whose they were. He became angry about them going through his journal, saying it was personal and only written because he was depressed and had nothing to do with the murder. Well, for one thing, the underwear were not Ollie's, and what appeared to be blood on the seat didn't react chemically to a preliminary test. And of course there was James's alibi, so they really didn't have anything concrete to hold him on. It was disappointing because they really thought that he was the killer. Now, in July of 2002, the search went national. People began to think that maybe the killer wasn't from the area at all, or that if he was, he had fled to another state. So new flyers were made and news articles created with the headline, "Do you know who killed me?" featuring a picture of Allie, as well as a write-up about who she was and how she was killed. Leawood police sent the sketches and the case information to other police departments around the country. They wanted to see if it was possible that this was a serial case. Did any other departments have cases that resembled this one? They were desperate to know if they could put any pieces together. But while other departments provided leads to the investigation, none of them led to capturing Ali's killer. Roger kept at it too. He said he was struggling, that sometimes he had to fight just to get out of bed, but he had to keep going for Ali. He wouldn't let himself stop until the murderer was found. He kept in frequent contact with the local police. He said, "We're always in touch, at least once a week, and then sometimes many, many times." There were many days where every single day of the week they would have at least 1 or 2 leads that would rise to the top of the pile. And Roger knew what happens to solve rates when cases go cold. He refused to let that happen to Ali's case. But then, in February of 2003, 8 months after Ali's murder, a familiar name resurfaced: James Strader. One of the investigators was actually watching the news when James's mugshot was put on the screen in relation to being wanted for a string of brutal, forceful sexual assaults and kidnappings of young women. I can't say the word here, but I think you know what I mean. The Kansas City Star published the full details of James's series of crimes. He began in Gardner, Kansas, where he forced himself on a 22-year-old ex-girlfriend at knife point, then kidnapped her, driving her to Missouri. He drove to an abandoned mobile home and was trying to break in when a 14-year-old girl walked by. He threw her in his vehicle and took both women to another trailer, where he assaulted both of them. James then threatened the younger girl, saying that he knew where she lived and would kill her if she told anyone what happened. Then he let her go. James drove his ex-girlfriend back to Kansas City but forced her into relations with him once again before finally letting her go. Then he actually did this to a third woman in Hutchinson at knife point after knocking on her door, claiming that he had car trouble. This woman actually escaped. With all these women being attacked in this manner and knowing that someone had done something similar, but even worse to Ali, James was back on the investigators' radar. He fit the profile and looked like the sketch. But when the media found out that a suspect in Ali's murder was now wanted for 3 sexual assaults and kidnappings in Kansas and Missouri, with one of the victims as young as 14, a media frenzy began. The media latched onto the fact that the police never took James Strader's DNA. Plus, like I mentioned before, he had a Ford pickup truck, so everyone was convinced it had to be him. He had to be the killer. However, remember that in 2 of the 3 cases, James let the girls go and he didn't brutally beat any of the women. Ali, however, was murdered so violently. But clearly this guy is a very bad person. So many people thought that someone capable of this violent crime spree would also be capable of killing Ali. Maybe it was that she put up more of a fight and angered him. After all, she was very athletic and everyone thought there were just too many coincidences for it not to be James. So investigators looked more deeply into his background, and things only looked worse. In 1996, in a fit of road rage, he hit a man in the face with a wrench, so he was capable of violence. In that case, he was granted what's known as a diversion, meaning that he was ordered to pay restitution and pursue court-ordered therapy, but he wasn't put in jail. However, when he failed to do what he was ordered, he was put on probation. While on probation in 1998, he was charged with assault, burglary, and aggravated battery after he forced his way into the apartment of the 21-year-old mother of his child and attacked her. James's attorney was able to get the assault charge dropped because he showed that the woman had made similar allegations against a police officer that she had dated. But it looks like she was right though, doesn't it? This is why we should believe women. Just because it's happened to them more than once doesn't mean they're lying. There are more than just 1 or 2 men willing to force a woman into having their way with them. This time, James was sent to prison on burglary and aggravated battery charges. He remained incarcerated from July 1998 to August 1st, 2001, just a year before Ali's murder. The problem is no one knew where James was now. So the manhunt was on. 1 week passed, then 2, and finally 3 weeks had gone by with no leads on James's whereabouts. But right when they thought he slipped through their fingertips, they got a lucky break. There was news that he'd moved to Utah. Investigators on Ali's case made sure to forward all of the case information, as well as the warrant for his arrest, to the Utah authorities. Finally, Utah police ran into James when he decided to skip out on paying for gas. The gas station attendant called 911, and the police pulled James over just up the road, at which point he was arrested after they ran his license and saw that he had an arrest warrant. There's actually some dash cam footage of this. So, Leawood detectives were notified, and they thought the search for Ali Kemp's killer might at last be over. The Leawood Police Department flew Detective Langer out to interview James in Utah before he was even brought back to Kansas. When he was first arrested by police in Utah, it appeared he might even be willing to cooperate with law enforcement. He told police, when they pulled him over, "You might as well just cuff me now because I'm wanted." Then, in a Utah courtroom, he didn't speak to a lawyer and accepted his extradition back to Kansas. However, when Kansas police came calling to question him about Ali's murder, his cooperation ended. He continued to adamantly deny any involvement in her killing, even though he did admit that he looked like the guy in the composite sketch. But ultimately, he asked for a lawyer right away and wouldn't speak. Police didn't need James to answer any of their questions. They just needed his DNA. Unfortunately, because of his new string of crimes and his recent arrest, his DNA had been collected, and they felt sure it would be a match for the DNA from the crime scene. Finally, they received the results. It wasn't James Strader's DNA. It didn't match. He couldn't have been Ali's killer, and this was another huge letdown. Everyone had been so sure it was him. While the amount of tips coming in was a good thing, it also meant that this build-up followed by disappointment was a common occurrence for the Kemp family. They were on a roller coaster of emotions for the entire investigation, and this letdown with James wasn't the end they hoped for, just another disappointment. The one-year anniversary of Ali's death was approaching very fast, and Roger Kemp still refused to give up. He would not rest until he tried everything he could to track down his daughter's killer. Roger then had a new idea of how he could get the word out and not let the case run cold. He took out a half-page ad in USA Today, advertising a rebroadcasting of Ali's episode of America's Most Wanted. Then, Roger organized a rally for Ali, a benefit at the Longhorn Steakhouse in Leawood, where members of the Royals, the Kansas City baseball team, came out and signed autographs to raise money for the search for Ali's killer. The Royals' director of community relations said that it was important that her family knew they weren't alone in their pain, and that they were all grieving with them. On the one-year anniversary of Ali's death, her friends came together to remember her, holding a candlelight vigil and planning a memorial garden alongside Tomahawk Park, with dozens of petunias and plans for a memorial bench as well. This was when Roger came up with an even more innovative idea, one last-ditch effort to drum up tips: billboards. While driving, Roger realized how many people drive past billboards every day. Thousands and thousands, including people who weren't from the area and might even be from out of state. It was the perfect way to reach people that a flyer and a media campaign might have missed. I don't know if you remember or have been here long enough to have seen my close to 3-hour deep dive into the Rogers family murders. But they also used this idea of putting up a billboard, Roger said. He called the police to run this idea by them, and they said they had never heard of someone using a billboard to find a killer before, but they didn't think it could hurt. Billboards were expensive, though. In the Kansas City area, a 3-billboard package normally cost about $10,000 to $12,000 a month, plus $4,500 just to make the signs. But Roger didn't care. He would spare no expense to find his daughter's killer. However, in the end, he didn't have to break the bank, because a local advertising company heard what he wanted to do and gave him the space for these billboards free of charge. Just another example of how the Leawood community rallied behind Roger. Within weeks, there were billboards along US 71, Interstate 70, and Interstate 35 featuring the composite sketch, plus an image of the Ford pickup truck beneath giant red letters reading, "Do you know him?" Then, under that, it said "Wanted for questioning for murder," and at the bottom it read, 50,000 reward with a number to call. They were impossible to miss, and if you lived in this area, you would drive by at least one of them sooner or later. Roger sat back and waited, praying that his new approach would work, and work it did. The police said they were shocked at how effective this new strategy was. Tips started to pour in again, like they had in the beginning of the case. This was also around the time in May 2003 when the pool where Ali had been killed was finally reopened to local residents. Almost 1 year had passed since it had been designated as a crime scene, from June 18th until they reopened it. When they did, they implemented new security measures, especially considering the killer was still out there. Electronic key cards were needed to enter, and pool employees were now wearing panic alarms that signaled a monitoring company to call 911 in case of an emergency. They also had 2 people on duty at a time. And I wondered about the access from the beginning. This was supposedly a private pool for Foxborough and Hunter Ridge residents only, but it did appear that there were no measures to prevent anyone from just walking right in. But now I want to go back to all the tips. There was one lead that seemed promising, a lookalike of the second sketch, and his name was Ted Hoover. A caller said that Ted not only looked like the sketch, but he also owned a pool servicing company and a Ford pickup truck. So police ran his name, but they found no address or information for a Ted Hoover in the area. They waited, hoping that more information might come in. And sure enough, another caller reached out, saying that they thought the sketch resembled Ted Hoover. But this caller provided an address for Ted in Kansas City. Sergeant Hansen jumped on this immediately. He drove to Ted's house to interview him. Ted answered the door, and at first, he answered Hansen's questions, saying that he knew of the Foxborough pool and that he did own a pool service company. However, when Hansen's questions shifted towards Ali, that's when Ted seemed to clam up. He said he had nothing to do with her murder. He couldn't remember where he was the day she was killed, but he knew he had never been to that pool before, and he refused to provide a DNA sample. He said he wanted to consult with his lawyer first. So immediately, Sergeant Hansen was on high alert. He knew that any time someone refused to give a DNA sample, it made them look suspicious. He wondered, could this be their man? Could the billboards really have led police straight to Ali's killer? Based on what they had so far, though, the police couldn't force Ted to provide DNA. He said that he'd check back with them after consulting with his attorney, but you know what? That never happened. Eventually, they hoped they would find a way to get this man's DNA. That's all they really needed. So a few days later, an investigator called Ted's lawyer to set up an appointment to get his DNA. But his lawyer said that was going to be a problem because Ted had skipped town. The lawyer said he wasn't exactly sure where his client had gone, but he thought it might have been to Florida. Police were now even more suspicious of this Ted Hoover. He matched the sketch, he owned a Ford pickup truck, he worked in pool services, and he didn't seem to have an alibi for the day of Ali's murder. Also, he refused to provide DNA, and now, why would you run? Innocent people don't usually flee. So police knew they had to track Ted down. And once again, the billboards came to the rescue. Another caller contacted the police with information about Ted Hoover. This caller said they thought he might have moved to Connecticut with his girlfriend. Finally, in November 2004, a full year and a half after Ali's murder, police located the girlfriend's address in Branford, Connecticut. They contacted postal workers who delivered to that house, and one postal worker said there wasn't anyone named Ted Hoover receiving mail at that location, but there was a man living there, and he was receiving mail under the name Benjamin Appleby. Police immediately looked up records for Benjamin Appleby, and when law enforcement searched his name, they found a man who looked suspiciously like Ted Hoover. Furthermore, this Appleby guy did have a criminal record, and he'd even served time in prison. So police wanted to go even further into Benjamin Appleby's background, trying to learn as much as they could about him before they made their move. They found out that as a child, Ben's parents divorced, and he moved back and forth between them. His father, Gary Appleby, knew from the time his son was just a kid that there were no doubts. There were a lot of problems with him. Young Ben started stealing beer from the fridge at 10 or 11 years old, according to his parents. And in high school, his behavior only escalated. He started getting drunk every weekend, and in 1992, the summer of his junior year, Ben robbed a donut shop and a convenience store. In one robbery, he pointed a gun at the clerk and pulled the trigger. The gun didn't go off, and later Ben told the therapist that it wasn't even loaded. But nevertheless, that would have been a horrifying experience for the clerk, who didn't know that. Ben explained his action, saying that he hated his life at home and was feeling lousy. It all just worked him up to the point that he committed armed robbery. Then he spiraled even further during his senior year. He stopped doing his work, partied constantly, and said that he had a bad reputation, living up to it. Finally, he ended up dropping out. The robbery was only the beginning for Benjamin Appleby. 6 months later, his crimes took a more sinister and sexual nature when he was arrested for doing inappropriate things in public in front of 2 women in a parking lot. In his court-appointed therapy, Ben's therapist observed that he failed to realize the severity of his sexual misconduct and that he was at high risk of reoffending, potentially posing sexual, verbal, or physical harm to himself or others. This man didn't see the issue with what he was doing. He didn't think it was wrong. And that's a big problem. If someone doesn't think what they're doing is wrong, then what will stop them from continuing? The therapist's report described Ben as a young man who had a history of inappropriate alcohol use, anger problems, frequent legal entanglements, and appeared to be emotionally immature. However, the therapist also noted that he was intelligent and appeared to be fairly motivated for treatment, making positive changes in his life and behavior. However, this would not turn out to be the case because just 8 months after the first indecent exposure incident, the state of Connecticut issued an arrest warrant for a similar incident involving another man, Ted Hoover. It's obvious they're one and the same. I hope that wasn't too confusing. He obviously was going by a new name and committing the same crimes. Kansas police immediately called Connecticut law enforcement, since Ben was now in Connecticut. They needed to work with local authorities to bring him in for questioning and hopefully get his DNA. Connecticut police found 2 warrants for Ben for indecent exposure that were a few years old. They told the Kansas police that they could arrest him on these outstanding charges, and while he was at the station, Kansas police could attempt to question him about his potential involvement in Ali's murder. This sounded like a good plan. Connecticut police also obtained a residential search warrant for the property where Ben had been living with his girlfriend and a warrant for his DNA. Now all they had to do was make their move. On November 8, 2004, Connecticut Detective Daniel Jace arrested Benjamin at the house he was residing at. Other officers remained there to search the home per their warrant, while the detective took Ben in for questioning. While they were driving to the station, Ben told the detective that he had been in some trouble in his past, so he'd taken on the name of his deceased childhood friend, Teddy. As soon as Ben arrived at the station, the authorities took that DNA sample per their warrant. He did attempt to refuse the DNA swap, but the authorities informed him he would be compelled to provide the DNA whether he wanted to or not because of the warrant. So, he had to comply. By now, investigators had interviewed over 1,300 potential witnesses and suspects and collected 900 DNA samples for comparison. They were hoping this would be their last one. This news clip that I found shows such a creepy picture of Ben. He just looks evil to me, and maybe that's because he is. Do you think that he resembled the sketch? I did not think he was as much of a match as James Strader, but I do see some similarities. While police waited for the results of the DNA test, Kansas police prepared to question Ben, who was not aware that the Leawood police officers were there at the Connecticut station. They had that element of surprise on their side, and they wanted to seize that opportunity. They wanted to ensure the conditions were optimal to get a confession if this was their guy, because they knew they probably wouldn't get another chance like this. So what they did was prepare a secondary interview room with some props. Yes, they said props, because that's what they did. They created a fake bulletin board on the wall, and on the board they had pictures like an aerial shot of the pool area, an image of Ali, one of Ben himself, Ali's obituary, crime scene photos, an investigation timeline, and all kinds of key pieces of evidence. Then, On the desk where they were going to sit, bent down, were two really thick 3-ring binders with Benjamin Appleby's name on the spine. They wanted to give him the impression that those binders were full of nothing but a bunch of incriminating evidence on him. And it was brilliant. When they arrived at the station, Ben was read his Miranda rights, and then told that there were two people who wanted to speak to him regarding an unrelated matter, not related to the indecent exposure warrants. First, the police took him into a regular interview room, not the one with the props in it. He was introduced to the Leawood detectives. As soon as Ben realized that this unrelated matter was the murder of Ali Kemp, he wasn't going to talk. He continued to deny his involvement, saying he was not at that pool, he had never been there, and he had nothing to do with her murder. That's when they said, "Okay, fine, no problem." They started to lead him back out into the hallway, but instead of bringing him back to speak with the Connecticut cops, they moved him right into that staged interview room. As soon as his eyes locked with all the props, everything on the wall, he was just taking it all in. He was really focused on the picture of him in the middle of that link board, linking all the evidence to him and Ali's case. Police then lied. They told him, they're allowed to lie, by the way, I think you know that by now, but they told him that they found Ted Hoover's name on a log of people who were present at the pool that day. He wouldn't stop looking at that board with his picture on it right next to Ali's. Finally, he said, "I lied to you. I was at the pool. I just remembered that." Police knew that they had him, they just had to keep pushing. They needed to get a full confession because he could be about to give a reason why he was there, but still say he wasn't involved. So, they asked him why he had been there that day. Ben explained that he went there because he was hoping to obtain the pool's business as a new client for his pool maintenance company. Sounds reasonable. It sounds like it could actually be true. Now, I have portions of this interview, and I'm going to play some of them for you, because then he went on to say that when he was there, he did see Ali as well. He said he saw her from afar, and he thought she was cute. He wanted to talk to her.
Can you go ahead and tell us what you remember? What happened that day?
I went in there with the intentions of looking at the pool to get the business.
She was in the pump.
She was in the pump room doing something with the pump.
And you wanted to have sex with her,
I
right?
wanted to hit on her, she was an attractive young lady.
So that's what he did because he said she was good looking. Since he was actually a pool guy, he easily entered the pool area without seeming suspicious. He was carrying that bucket with him, making it look like perhaps he had been called there to test the pool water. He looked official with his pool company attire on, and Ali wouldn't have suspected anything. When he got there, she was entering the pump room to take care of her attendant duties. As she began working on the pumps, the double doors were propped open by 2 trash cans on either side, so anyone could freely enter that room. And that's exactly what Ben did. Then he began talking to Ali. He said that he hit on her, that it was small talk, and he didn't exactly remember what he said, but that Ali wasn't interested in what he had to say. And of course, that did not go over well with him. Ali couldn't have known that he was a violent predator. He was blocking the doorway so Ali couldn't get out, and that is when Ali became concerned. She attempted to go around him to escape, but that's when he grabbed her.
Ali was in the pump room. No, I just hit on her, man. She was good looking. Small talk, I don't remember exactly what I said. She didn't, wasn't interested in anything I had to say. And I was blocking the doorway. I tried to hit on her. I touched her. Not hard, nothing. Either on the shoulder or the hip or something.
Okay, so he touched her. He grabbed her shoulder, or her hip, or her neck. And I think that would scare any woman, all alone and trapped in a room that you couldn't get out of with a complete stranger. Ali pushed him back, and she actually punched him. She stood up to this man, this big, strong man that stood in the way of her freedom to get out of there. But Ben wasn't going to let her go. He said that he lost it. Actually, I'll just let you hear him tell you.
She pushed me back, and she punched me. I was blocking the doorway, where she rejected me. She pushed me back. I just lost it. I hit her back, all the way in the face, I think. I don't know how many times I hit her. took her clothes off with the intention of trying to have sex with her.
And what happened?
I strangled her, I guess. You said she was strangled. I know I strangled her. I don't know what I strangled her with. And I don't know why I did it. I don't know why I did it. I killed her. And I laid it on. I just laid it on her. I didn't want anybody to find her like that. But I didn't think she was dead.
He said that he hit her again and again, and he kept hitting her. Ben is strong, he's big, and he'd been a wrestler in high school. He'd been in prison. He easily overpowered Ali. He said he didn't know how many times he had hit her, but I think it's clear from the autopsy it was a brutal attack. He said that after she was unconscious, he took off her clothing to attempt to have his way with her. And even more disturbingly, police finally learned the reason that his blood had been found on the antibiotic ointment tube. Because he went to that first aid kit to find something he could use as a lubricant. I'm not kidding. He grabbed for the antibiotic ointment and used it to make his limp noodle stand at attention, but it wasn't working. This is a common problem that we see in these kinds of predators. They have issues in that department, and it's one of the reasons they take out their frustration on women like this. Finally, he said, I don't know why I did it, but I killed her. He was saying this through tears and sobbing. I don't know if it was real or fake, but he admitted that he strangled her. He said, I guess I strangled her, because he explained that he heard that she had been strangled. So he must have strangled her, but he doesn't know what he strangled her with. We know that it must have been something like a rope, a string, something he could tie around her neck while putting pressure on her shoulders and pulling backward while she's lying face down on the floor. Ben then explained that before leaving, he laid the blue tarp over her body. He said, I just laid it on her. I laid it on her. I didn't want anyone to find her like that. I didn't think she was dead. He didn't mean to kill her. This man knew exactly what he was doing. That's clear. He saw what he had done to this poor woman, and he couldn't even bear to look at it. So, he covered her with a tarp to conceal her, not only from others, but because of the shame that killers actually feel when they realize what they've done. Not all killers feel this way, but many of them don't want to look at their victims. It's clear from what Ben said in his confession, and from the injuries that Ali sustained, that despite the utter shock and terror of the moment, Ali fought her absolute hardest to escape. But unfortunately, Ben was enraged at her rejection. He felt entitled to her attention, entitled to her affection and her body. When she said no, he murdered her slowly and brutally. Then, after all of that horrific violence, Ben left the pool carrying his bucket and waving nonchalantly at Ali's friend as he did. He couldn't even keep himself away from the scene for very long after what he had done. He returned later that same day to watch the police investigation in the crime scene. He stood among the friends and family of Ali Kemp as they put up a memorial in her honor outside the pool. He watched the police tape off the scene, and he knew that he had done that. What kind of person is capable of that? Can you imagine standing right next to him in that crowd and not even knowing it? The reason they knew he did this was because he actually got in a car accident nearby. Someone hit his truck, yet no one made the connection at that time that that truck matched the description of the one in the parking lot. The police had even gotten his name. He gave it as Ted Hoover, but they also got his phone number. And all that time went by, and they didn't know. Police were shocked and horrified by Ben's confession, but they also felt vindicated. They were glad that they finally had their killer. He was caught. I touched on this, but by the conclusion of this case, more than 1,300 witnesses and potential suspects were questioned locally and in places like Las Vegas, South Carolina, Texas, Atlanta, Colorado, Washington, D.C., Utah, and Connecticut. DNA samples of over 900 people were compared to the ones from the crime scene. The four primary investigators on this case, Sergeant Scott Hansen and Detectives Joe Langer, John Dickey, and Ron Hulley, never gave up. But despite all of their work, they were quick to attribute a large part of the success of this investigation to Roger Kemp. Langer said he knows it might even sound corny, but Roger became a friend, and they saw a friend who was hurting. They said that Roger was such a devoted father and that they may never have solved this case without him. he never gave up. But despite this brief moment of triumph, police and Roger knew their work was far from over. They wouldn't be able to relax until they got a conviction. They said, "A lot of our work is just the beginning, and we owe it to the family to get a conviction." Roger added that while there's relief in finding Ali's killer, it doesn't mean it's an end to their grief. People talk about closure, but he didn't see closure. He was still breathing, and Ali wasn't. And he had a problem with that. Roger let it be known that while Ben might have started this fight with Ali, he was going to finish it. Before Ben left that night to be transferred to Kansas jail, he told detectives that he planned to just take a plea deal. He didn't want Ali's family to have to go through a trial because they had been through enough. But you can't trust anything a monster like this says, because within a day of the interrogation, Ben's DNA was matched to the DNA from the crime scene. He was Ali's killer, no doubt about it. But now he wasn't interested in playing nice. I don't think he ever intended to simply give a plea deal. But he pled not guilty. He had all kinds of excuses as to why he allegedly was forced to confess, claiming it was a false confession, that the investigators threatened to hurt him and his family if he didn't confess. Initially, he was charged with first-degree murder, which is punishable in Kansas by a life sentence with 25 or 50 years minimum served before the offender has a chance of parole. However, 2 hours before his first court appearance, his charges were upgraded to first-degree capital murder. This meant that he could now face the death penalty. The charges had been upgraded because Ben's actions demonstrated premeditation. The murder was committed during an attempted commission of his sex crime, and because of the brutality of the crime. But now, the prosecution would have to decide if they wanted to go for the death penalty, or what they call a hard 50, which is a life sentence with 50 years minimum before an offender has a chance at parole. The prosecution had to weigh many factors in making this decision. For one thing, 64% of death penalty convictions are reversed on appeals nationwide. Plus, only one person had been successfully convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death since Kansas had reinstated capital punishment in 1994. And that was a guy named John Robinson Sr., who killed 2 women and concealed their bodies in barrels. There were also 8 aggravating factors to qualify a murder for the death penalty. It has to be force-scream murder, multiple victims, financial gain, a contract killing, the killing of an incarcerated prisoner, resisting a lawful arrest, or the only one that applied in Ali's case, the murder was committed in an especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel manner. Unfortunately, the prosecution in Ali's murder felt that they fell a little short of the standard for especially heinous, because usually it had to involve either torture or mutilation. So in considering all these factors, they chose not to seek the death penalty. Instead, they were going to try to incarcerate him for the rest of his natural life. Well, this didn't go over very well with Roger, who thought his daughter's slaying was certainly atrocious enough to warrant the death penalty. But of course, we know this is the law. These are statutes. It's not about how we feel, but it's about the definition of the crime. Roger studied the law and felt like the legal system gave way too much protection to murderers. He also felt that he had really let Ali down. No matter your opinion on the death penalty, I can certainly empathize with Roger's anger and frustration. Ali was beaten again and again, then slowly strangled, and the state was telling him that her death wasn't heinous or cruel enough. When Ben appeared in court for his first hearing, he was wearing a tear-away self-harm prevention vest, and he used a copy of his charges to shield his face from the media. The trial was set for November of 2005, and when it came time for that trial, his attorney began by stating that this wasn't a case of who done it. They weren't asking to let him go home after this, but they did want the right justice. The case would focus on pushing for the jury to find Ben guilty of a lesser crime than capital murder, thus reducing the time he spent in prison. In order to get Ben this lesser sentence, the defense, who was a woman by the way, I just want to point that out, because sometimes that's a strategic move when a man is charged with killing a woman to show, look, a woman is willing to represent him, focused on Ben's mental state at the time of the crime. She also wanted to focus on Ali's condition when paramedics arrived at the scene and the police's alleged coercion of Ben's confession. She made the argument that he was under the influence of extreme mental and emotional disturbance at the time of the murder, and thus his capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law was substantially impaired. I personally think this is a huge stretch. I get what she's trying to convey, that Ben snapped and wasn't in control of his actions for a brief period while he committed the murder. But come on, who wouldn't feel mentally and emotionally disturbed while they're killing someone? She also implied that Ali might not have been dead when he left her, emphasizing the fact that firefighters had performed life-saving measures on Ali when they arrived and that rigor mortis hadn't set in. This also felt like a flimsy argument. Even if Ali wasn't dead when he left her there, there's no contesting the fact that she died soon after, and it was a direct result of Ben's actions. Finally, his defense attorney tried to make the case that since Kansas City had colluded with the Connecticut police, they acted outside their jurisdiction, and that the confession they got wouldn't be allowed. The judge, however, ruled that the confession was in fact admissible, and that was a win for the prosecution. The prosecution focused their case on the extreme violence with which this murder was committed, the premeditation involved, and Ben's history of violence and sex crimes. They also countered the defense's claims that Ali had not been dead when paramedics found her, explaining that it was common for firefighters to perform life-saving measures just in case, even when a person appears to be dead. They noted that the EKG machine hadn't even been able to find the necessary heart rhythm required to be used. They had to explain what premeditation was to the jury. While the defense claimed that Ben had not intended to kill Ali when he arrived at the pool that day, the prosecution explained he didn't have to have a plan that far in advance for this murder to be premeditated. They instructed the jury that, by Kansas law, premeditation doesn't have to be present before a fight, quarrel, or struggle begins. There's no specific time period required for premeditation, but it does require more than an instantaneous, intentional act of taking someone's life. Premeditation can occur at any time during a violent episode that ultimately causes someone's death. Plus, it was planned. His truck was seen there on other occasions, and you could have seen the pool maintenance schedule hanging on the wall outside the pump room. It's large, it's in plain sight, and it would have made sense to a person like him who worked on pools to know the times when certain tasks needed to be carried out by pool attendants, including Ali. We know she was alive at 2:50 when she texted her friend and called her boyfriend. She was already attacked by 5 o'clock when Tyler came to relieve her from her shift. According to the pool maintenance schedule that was on that wall, at 4 p.m., Ali would have gone to test the pool water. She would have gone into that pump room for chemicals, and Ben was waiting for that specific moment when he could corner her. These details, coupled with the autopsy report that said it likely took Ben 15 minutes to strangle Ali, clearly established premeditation. 15 minutes was not instant. There were many moments in which he could have stopped what he was doing, but instead, he chose to keep going. In the end, the prosecution called 13 witnesses to testify on Ali's behalf, including her father, her boyfriend, and her brother. They also played the 5-minute-long emotional recording of Roger Kemp's 911 call. People on both sides of the courtroom were in tears. It was no surprise that on December 5, 2005, after only 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Benjamin Appleby guilty of capital murder and attempted forcible intercourse. When the jury announced their decision, Roger said, "It seems like that day had been 3 days long," and everyone swarmed to hug him and the rest of the Kemp family. Ali's boyfriend shook each one of the detectives' hands. Finally, they had done it. Ben was guilty. Now, all that was left was the sentencing. And like a coward that he was, Ben did not attend the sentencing hearing on December 26th to face the Kemp family and their impact statements. The Johnson County District Attorney, Phil Morrison, said that jailers had trouble getting Ben out of a cell that morning. Why? Because Ben said he didn't want to hear all the lies and misrepresentations about his criminal past. Poor Ben, he doesn't want to face the truth. It wasn't lies, It's the truth about what this monster really did and who he really is. Morrison went on to say that cowards shrink responsibility, and that's what he was trying to do. Ali's mom, Kathy, who had stayed away from most of this trial and wasn't in the public as much as her husband, did make an appearance for the sentencing along with Roger. More than 50 others filled the courtroom, all wearing white and lavender ribbons for Ali. The prosecution reiterated their case from trial, and the defense brought 2 people forward to testify on Ben's behalf: his sister and a clinical psychologist. His sister, in an extremely quiet voice, told the courtroom that Benjamin would always be her big brother, and his psychologist said that he was suffering from intermittent explosive disorder. We've heard about this in other cases. It's characterized by an outpouring of rage, sometimes out of proportion to what might have happened. They wanted to offer this as a potential mitigating factor. In the end, however, Ben's witnesses made zero impact on the judge, who assigned him the maximum sentence of 50 years and 228 months for the attempted forced sexual conduct. This was an absolute victory for the Kemp family. It was the highest possible sentence he could have received other than death. But in the end, Ali's mother, Kathy, said, "It's never going to be over. I'm never going to get Ali back. I'm not going to be able to help her pick out a wedding dress. I'm not going to be a grandmother. It will go on until I die. She was the love of my life. I'm so sorry to this family, and it is truly sad that her only daughter was dead and never coming back." Sentencing should have been the end of all these horrible trials for this family, who had already suffered so much. After almost 5 years of fighting, they should have been able to start the new year attempting to find some peace and start to rebuild their lives. But even after the trial, Ben would not let his conviction rest. Like many other criminals, he appealed his sentence, not once, not twice, but 5 separate times. 5. Yeah, you've got to have something really wrong with you if you confess, your DNA is at the scene, and you're still trying to get out of murdering someone. He appealed in November 2009, then again in October 2010, in February 2015, in August 2019, and most recently, just a few years ago, in April 2021. And Roger fought Ben on every one of his appeals. He said, "I never ever wanted to say his name. I never said it but once, and then I swear I would never say his name again. But I'm going to say it a lot now. Benjamin Appleby is a murderer. He deserves to be in jail for 50 years. Roger collected information on Ben's past behavior to show that not only did he harm Ali, but that he had a history of dangerous behavior, which would likely reoccur if he was released. Some of this evidence came from a book, All I Was Here, by Jim Davis, in which Ben's years of violent sex crimes preceding Ali's murder were detailed. Roger Kemp shared an email, a P.O. box, and even a Facebook page for anyone who wanted to submit information to help bolster his case against Ben. Anyone who wanted to talk about his past, his violent tendencies, or their experiences with him. Roger said that Ben is someone who goes against our society, who goes against our laws, and who doesn't care about the law until he's caught. Then he wants every right under the book that he's so willing to take away from someone else. He silenced Ali's voice. She has no voice in this. She can't speak, so he was speaking for her. And shockingly, one of his appeals actually did go through. They overturned his attempted forcible intercourse conviction, the one that added the 228 consecutive months. That was removed. The court ruled that it was kind of double-dipping because he'd already been given 2 sentences for the same crime. His attempt was part of that 50-year sentence. But that wasn't good enough for Ben. He wanted to try for more freedom. In the following decade, he appealed on several other grounds, all of which were unsuccessful. Thank goodness, he's still incarcerated in the Hutton State Prison, where he will not be eligible for parole until 2054. And although Ben's many appeals have been traumatizing for the Kemp family, who have had to be forced to wonder again and again whether Ali's killer might be set free, they have not allowed this to distract them from their mission. After Ali's death, Ali's friends and family said they always knew Ali would make a difference in her life, although they didn't expect her to make a difference after death. They hoped she would be proud of the way her name, her story, and her family are changing the lives of tens of thousands of women. Roger Kemp worked to form the Ali Kemp Educational Foundation, which forms the acronym TAKE, T-A-K-E. They called it Take Defense. TAKE provides educational scholarships to young women and hosts 2-hour-long self-defense classes. Their website states that women have the right to feel safe wherever they go, and their classes, offered around the country, often on college campuses, aim to make that goal a reality. They offer classes and tips on how to avoid a variety of dangerous situations, how to verbally and psychologically respond in case of an attack, and ultimately how to engage if you do enter into a physical attack. They teach women how to strike an attacker's eyes, nose, throat, and groin long enough to break away. Knowing these moves can help. If you've never practiced anything like this, you usually just freeze up, but when you know the moves, you can easily do them and possibly get away. I don't know if Ali could have done anything to prevent this monster from harming her, unless maybe she was armed with a gun, and that wouldn't have seemed very reasonable or even been allowed. Wearing a bathing suit or shorts, or just attending a local pool, thinking that this 19-year-old would have had to carry a firearm just to be safe? I think the best way would have been to avoid this altogether. Proactively protect women by never having them work alone. Killers are less likely to initiate an attack on a woman if they're with someone else. They don't want to deal with someone fighting them or running to get help, so they purposely target unsuspecting females who are by themselves and more vulnerable. Ben saw Ali alone. He waited for his chance to attack her. Had there been just one other person at the pool that day, either working or just swimming, this could have been different. Roger was even honored by former President Obama at the time and awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal, the second highest civilian award given by the president, for Roger's work with the Take Foundation. Tragically, Roger passed away unexpectedly on March 1, 2022. He left behind his wife of 43 years, Kathy Kemp, his 2 sons, Tyler and Drew, and a brand new granddaughter who was only 16 months old at the time. She was named Alexandra after Ali. He was remembered in a memorial service on Friday, March 11th at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection. His family said, quote, "We know our darling Ali was waiting on March 1st when the gates of paradise opened for her father. Though Ali couldn't come back to her dad, eventually he went to her, knowing he had done everything he could do for his daughter on this earth before joining her in heaven." End quote. It all began with a chilling 911 call.
Denver 911, where's your brother?
We had a car just wrecked. 2 people in the car, I think.
Oh, can you tell us anybody injured?
Yeah, they're really jacked up. I mean, the lady looks dead. No, he's freaking out. She's laying in his arms, okay? Okay. She's dead, I think.
Before diving into today's story, let me recount a chilling incident. In the early hours of November 17th, 2009, at 1:40 a.m., a car crash shattered the silence of a dead-end street in West Denver, Colorado. Steve Sanchez, a nearby resident, was startled awake by a loud, jarring bang. Without hesitation, he rushed outside to investigate. As his eyes scanned the dark street, they landed on a wrecked car, and a sinking feeling told him that something truly dreadful had occurred. The scene before him confirmed it was a devastating accident. Without hesitation, he dialed 911. Inside the wrecked car, a woman lay limp in the arms of the male passenger, who was frantically shaking her, his voice trembling as he called out her name again and again. "Brittany, Brittany." The man, Robert Walters, clung to her, his eyes locked onto hers, filled with desperation. Blood was everywhere, but he refused to give up, shouting through his tears, begging her to breathe. The driver of that car was Brittany Brashers. Brittany Renee Brashers was born May 6, 1987, in Peoria, Illinois, to Barry and Suzanne Brashers. Brittany had 2 siblings, a sister Sarah and a younger brother John. They were all very close. The Brashers family was an active bunch of people. They loved to play sports and spend a lot of time outdoors. Brittany did it all: water sports like tubing, basketball, hiking, swimming, skiing, even hunting with her dad. If it was outdoors, she was down, but it was even better if her mom Suzanne was with her. Especially as Brittany got older, the mother and daughter could pass as sisters or best friends. They were attached at the hip and had so much fun together. As her best friend and Brittany's most trusted confidant, her mother Suzanne was closer to her than most daughters and mothers are. Brittany was known as an incredible person and friend. She was easy to get along with and had a very vibrant and free-spirited personality. Suzanne was very similar, a vibrant, beautiful woman who taught Brittany so many things in life. They shared the very same passion for being outdoors. But sadly, Suzanne was diagnosed with cancer and lost her battle. She passed away when Brittany was only 17 years old. Brittany's life was never the same after she lost her mother. A huge piece of her heart was gone, her best friend. She was more affected by Suzanne's death than most people who were close to her. They just had a special bond that could not be replicated. This is when Brittany's wild side came alive. She became more reckless, started going out more, partying and drinking. Brittany struggled to find meaning in her life without her mother's constant presence. And over time, Brittany changed into a different person. She started hanging out with people her dad really did not like. However, the bond between her and her brother John got stronger. They were close in age and both going through the loss of their mother. John looked up to Brittany as a role model, but of course she wasn't perfect, and that didn't matter. Her closest friends and family knew who she was on the inside. Brittany continued to party after graduating from Farmington High School in 2005. She didn't have any particular direction that she planned on going in, but by the time she entered her 20s, she decided to slow down on her partying and start taking her life more seriously, which was a relief to her father, who really just wanted the best for her. She began talking to him about making positive changes in her life. One day in 2007, she told her dad she was going to enlist in the Air Force. This would give Brittany a sense of belonging, discipline, and a family of new people on the same mission, which would help her find herself again. Her dad, Barry, was thrilled and excited for his daughter. He was delighted to see Brittany returning to her old self after so many years. His pride in her could not have been greater, and he had high hopes for her future. She met some of her closest friends from the military, including her best friend, Tiffany Peoples. Brittany loved the outdoors and anything that raised her adrenaline, so the Air Force worked out perfectly. She wasn't the type of person to talk the talk without walking the walk. Instead of just dreaming about doing things, she did them. That's who Brittany was. She was stationed at Peterson Air Force Base, which is now called Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado Springs. Back when Brittany was stationed there, she was working in a dental lab as a dental technician. Brittany was loved by so many of her patients and everyone she met. Master Sergeant Art Figueroa, her boss at the dental office, described her as an excellent worker. She always went above and beyond to help people, regardless of her duties. In February of 2009, Brittany was deployed to Iraq, where she worked in a non-combat security position. After serving in the Middle East, Brittany received a medal for her dedication to the Air Force. Just a few months later, she was back living and working on the Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. So how did she end up in a horrible car accident all the way out in Denver, over an hour and a half from the base, on that fateful November night in 2009? Brittany's dad, Barry, awoke to a phone call at around 2 o'clock in the morning. An officer was calling to inform him that his daughter had been in a car accident and that he should get to the hospital as fast as possible. This is the type of phone call that no one wants to get, especially a parent. He was all the way in Illinois. It was a 13-hour drive to Denver Health Rocky Mountain Regional Trauma Center. He called the hospital right away, hoping to get a little bit more information about his daughter. The trauma doctor delivered the terrible news. Brittany was already gone. Barry was absolutely stunned. He was shocked. It was unbelievable. He was sitting there calling to learn about her condition, and he found out the worst news possible, that there's nothing he can do, that she's already deceased. Sadly, another loved one was sitting by Barry's side, Brittany's younger brother, John. Both of them were in a state of disbelief, so much so that they were unable to even form an emotion. It hadn't hit them yet. It just could not be real. They were informed that Brittany had been drinking the night of the accident. Her toxicology report came back, and she was above the legal limit. Yet she still got behind the wheel. There were so many questions left unanswered. One thing that really remained a mystery was why she was on dead-end road, a road that she had no reason to be going down. The theory was that they had gotten tragically lost on their way back from a photo shoot. Sadly, drunk driving accidents are all too common and totally preventable. Every single day, 29 people in the United States die in motor vehicle crashes that involve an alcohol-impaired driver. This is one death every 50 minutes. Drunk driving kills more than 10,000 people a year on average, and it's so devastating to think that this one decision to get behind the wheel can change so many lives. I'm sure that none of those people intended to cause any harm, but they made that choice, and it's unbelievably tragic. When friends heard that Robbie Walters was with Brittany when the accident occurred, they knew there was something more to the story. To understand their concerns, we have to go back in time to the beginning of the year, in February, when Brittany was deployed to Iraq. It was at that time she met the strikingly handsome California boy named Robert Walters, affectionately known as Robbie. Have you ever met someone that you just feel you've known your whole life? Someone that just instantly feels like they are connected with you? You laugh together, you even cry together, you confide in each other, and you feel like they bring out the best in you. That is what it was like when Brittany and Robbie met. Nothing but laughs and a good time. And it also didn't hurt that Robbie was very good looking, at least in Brittany's eyes, and actually many other women's perspectives as well. He was popular, with movie star good looks, deep, piercing blue eyes, a big white smile, and the charm to go with it. Brittany's best friend Tiffany liked Robbie. He was really funny, charismatic, and just very likable. She watched as he and Brittany really hit it off. It seemed like a match made in heaven. But Brittany soon learned that it was more of a hell to like Robbie so much. She found out he was married. Brittany was crushed. When you feel that connected to someone, you usually hope to see where those feelings will go. Those plans were pretty much grounded before they even got off the ground. Getting involved with a married man was not something Brittany was interested in. As a matter of fact, it's forbidden in the Air Force. The price you pay for having an affair is a big one. It's not taken lightly, and it shouldn't be. Robbie had a lot to say about his marriage, but it wasn't about professing his love to his wife. Quite the contrary. He explained to Brittany that the marriage was more of a formality. The main reason he said he got married was for the military benefits, things like the family separation pay, and there are tons of incentives to get married. It's too tempting not to be hasty sometimes and make this decision for all the wrong reasons, especially when you're young. Whatever the reasons, marriage is marriage, and Robbie chose to make that commitment. It's a two-way street. It's not as though his wife Elena was able to give her take on the marriage. Bernie was left feeling empty, and Brittany left it at that. However, over the next couple of months, Robbie was too hard for her to resist, and he insisted it was fine that he wasn't in love with his wife. Soon, the pair was becoming intimate. They were dating, but since adultery is punishable by a severe degree in the Air Force, they kept the relationship a secret. After just a few months, another red flag went up when it came to Robbie. If cheating on his wife wasn't enough to steer clear of him altogether, in July he was kicked out of the Air Force for disciplinary reasons that were unrelated to the affair with Brittany. He was dishonorably discharged. Brittany stayed in Iraq for 4 more months, and then returned to her job at the base in the dental lab in Colorado. It wasn't long before she and Robbie reconnected. Brittany had always been very responsible, and she took her position as an airman very seriously. But as she spent more time with Robbie, everything else in her life took a back seat. It's not uncommon, especially when you fall head over heels for someone. They can be all you think about. You want to spend every waking and sleeping moment with them by your side. But let's not forget, Robbie isn't just by Brittany's side, he is still married to Elena, splitting his time between 2 women. Brittany's dad, Barry, met Robbie, as he did with many of Brittany's boyfriends over the years. None of them really meant that much to Barry, and he clearly didn't think Robbie was the one. But he'd only met him once, so perhaps hindsight was 20/20ths here. Not all fathers are thrilled with the man their daughter starts to date. Brittany wasn't that close to her father either. Not like she had been with her mom. he wouldn't have even known how much Robbie meant to Brittany. He was more observing things from a distance. It was Suzanne who held that special place in Brittany's life. The person she trusted the most with her heart, the one she confided in, and it seems like Robbie had filled that role now. It was he that Brittany confided in, shared her dreams with, and wanted a future with. At first, Tiffany was happy for Brittany, but when she started to see the sacrifices Brittany was making to be with Robbie, she was pretty disappointed. It made her dislike him. It's a good thing when someone special comes into our lives, but they should make us better, be a teammate. It seemed like the more time Brittany spent with Robbie, the less she had time for her friends and even her job. She started calling out of work all the time and not taking the Air Force seriously. Plus, their relationship was a rocky one. It seemed like they would be on and off all the time. I'm not sure if someone tipped off Brittany's boss, but he was someone she respected. He came to her one day and said, "I found out about Robbie's marriage. I don't know how serious this thing is with you two, but..." He tried to give her some advice. He told her that if she cared about him, that was fine. It was okay that they had feelings for one another, but it was in her best interest to wait. Let Robbie show her his intentions, let his marriage play out. Because if he truly loved Brittany and really did just marry for benefits, he would get a divorce, especially now that he was no longer in the Air Force. Figueroa wanted the best for Brittany, so he strictly advised against getting into a relationship with Robbie. The maximum punishment for infidelity in the Air Force is a dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all allowances and pay, and 1 year in prison. But no matter how much the people who loved Brittany tried to reason with her, her feelings for Robbie were too intense for her to walk away. I see these pictures of them together, and I can see the fire between them. Most of us have been in this type of relationship somehow, some way. They can last, for sure, but starting off on the wrong foot, without breaking off his current relationship, is not good for the long term. Brittany's friends would try to convince her not to continue until he divorced Elena, but Brittany couldn't resist. She said she loved him and was willing to risk whatever the consequences were. Besides, it had been almost a year, and they were still together. But it was at that 8-month mark when the storm clouds started to roll in over their already unstable relationship. So much of both of their true colors shone through, just like a rainbow after a storm, but it wasn't bright and joyful. The prize at the end of it was their first heated argument. It happened at Brittany's house on October 24th, 2009, and it escalated into the front yard where they were both physical with one another. It wasn't good. Brittany was hurt, both emotionally and physically. She had visible marks on her face and elsewhere, and the cops were called. Robbie was arrested and put in jail. After such a tumultuous time, Sergeant Figueroa had no choice but to put a strict no-contact order in place. If they were to be in contact in any way, Brittany could be discharged from the Air Force. It was tough, but it was the right decision to break it off with Robbie. Apparently, things were not working. I'm not sure what the argument was about, but the fact that Robbie was still married is enough to break it off. If he has no intention of divorcing his wife, Robbie was planning to move back to California after he was discharged from jail, and that distance would be good for them. As sad as it was, Brittany was at the point where she needed this breakup. She had to make this choice for herself and her future, and her friends and loved ones were supportive. They really wanted the old Brittany back. About a month later, Brittany was living a new life in many ways. She had thrown herself into sports and began playing for an all-female football league. She was really dedicated to it. It was an 8-on-8, full-on tackle football team, and she gave it her all. She was committed to her sport and really good at it. She was tiny, but she was a force, strong and fierce. Her team captain, Brittany Austin, was surprised when Brittany played at their first practice. She was excited to have Brittany on her team. It was around that 1-month mark of them being separated that Robbie reached out. He missed her and asked what her plans were for that week. He would be in town and wanted to see her. Even though they both knew they weren't allowed, sometimes, honestly, it makes it more intense knowing that it's forbidden. Things were going well for Brittany. Her spirits were high, she was happy, and she let Robbie know she was open to meeting up. but she was really busy that week. If he wanted to see her, he was going to have to tag along at the events she had planned. It was November after all, and there was lots to do between Thanksgiving and Christmas. The first thing she had on her agenda was a team photo shoot for the football league on the night of November 16th, out in downtown Denver at a strip club. It should be a fun time, all the ladies getting together, looking their best, getting their pictures taken for promo items to fundraise for their team. But they were also going to do some drinking and partying. As part of the concept for this photo shoot, the girls would pose semi-topless. They'd be completely nude on top, but covered by either a pair of footballs or someone's body hiding them, so they weren't totally exposing themselves. However, they were exposed to everyone at the photo shoot, some of whom were men who were supposed to be part of the shoot, as well as boyfriends and friends of the girls. The strip club was closed off to the public. Since Robbie was with Brittany, he was allowed to come inside and hang out. This was a fundraiser, and the faux photos were supposed to turn heads. Besides, Brittany wasn't with Robbie. She was single, and he was married to another woman. But after watching the shoot, getting increasingly more sexy with the girls taking their tops off, and Brittany being a part of it, Robbie couldn't handle it. He physically started to shake and looked like he was going to cry. He was clearly uncomfortable with what he was seeing. He started to cover his eyes and look down at his phone. Then people actually witnessed him not just crying, but bawling. He was so upset. The tears were falling from his eyes onto the floor. He was sad. He didn't see how this was ever going to work out between them. And it seemed like Brittany had a new life, new priorities, so he did something to try to get back at her for making him feel this way. In his mind, it was only right. He had to suffer, so why not her too? He texted Sergeant Figueroa and told him that he and Brittany were together that night. This was against the rules. He knew what the ramifications could be for Brittany, and it didn't matter to him. Just a month ago, he had been put in jail because of their altercation, so he figured it was tit for tat. He would get her in trouble, they would be even, and then he could move on to California and never look back. They left the event at around 12:30 a.m., and both of them had been drinking. An hour later, Brittany's car crashed right into a parked car on a dead-end road. You heard Steve Sanchez in that 911 call at the beginning of this video. This is how Brittany ended up dying in Robbie's arms. Here's that call again.
Denver 911, where's your
Yeah, we had a car just wrecked. 2 people in the car, I think.
Oh, can you tell, was anybody injured?
Yeah, they're really jacked up. I mean, the lady looks dead. No, he's freaking out. She's laying in his arms, okay? Okay. She's dead, I think.
As Steve Sanchez approached the vehicle, he saw a conscious man in the passenger seat, and the man was holding the body of a young woman, covered in blood, and repeatedly screaming, "Brittany, Brittany." However, the woman did not respond. He saw this man shake her, and because it looked like this man in the passenger seat was going to injure the woman more, Steve Sanchez told him to stop shaking her, as she was clearly not waking up. I was able to find some pictures of the accident, and I want to show them to you up on the screen if you're interested. This is what the vehicle looked like. She was driving a silver 2004 Pontiac Vibe. After hitting the parked vehicle, her car spun around and ended up with the back of it facing the dead-end road, right next to a wooden pole. I'm showing you the vehicle the way it looked following the crash. The majority of the damage to the vehicle was to the front driver's side. You can see the fender here is demolished, the hood is pushed up on the driver's side, and the windshield is visibly cracked. Steve Sanchez said that Robbie had a seatbelt on, but it looked like Brittany did not. It appeared that both of the airbags were deployed at the time of the accident. I can definitely see the driver's side one, and it looks like the one on the passenger side was also out as well. After the 911 call, authorities were dispatched to the location, and as officers arrived on the scene, it was pretty straightforward. Brittany had somehow lost control of the vehicle, presumably because she was drinking, and this terrible accident occurred. Brittany was transported to the Denver Health Medical Center, where she was later pronounced deceased. Robert Walters, who we now know as Robbie, was transported to Denver Health Medical Center as well, but he only had minor injuries. While he was there, He did tell an officer that Brittany was driving, but shouldn't have been because she was too intoxicated. Brittany was then transferred to the Denver coroner's office for a post-mortem examination. Robbie had also informed the officers at the hospital that he had been drinking as well and that his eyes were closed and he was dozing off on their drive back home, with music playing. He said that somehow Brittany had gotten off of the highway on the way back and made her way down this random dead-end street. He said he had no idea where they were or how they ended up there. He just woke up from the force of the accident, and that is when he saw Brittany in his lap, unconscious. He looked over and saw that she had hit her head on the windshield, right in front of the steering wheel, which we can see matches the cracks in the glass. Robbie's statement made sense to the first responders because he didn't seem to have any severe injuries, and the information was consistent with him wearing a seatbelt and Brittany not. Brittany's injuries were significant because she didn't have hers on. At the post-mortem examination, because of the fact that Brittany was a member of the United States Air Force, agents from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations attended this exam as well. An agent named Sherman Brooks on the scene informed the police that the individuals in the crash, Brittany and Robbie, were in a relationship with one another. A relationship that had a history of turmoil and was physical in nature. Robbie had just gotten out of jail, which was very important and definitely stood out during this examination. There were things that looked off about the accident, things that weren't exactly consistent with her injuries, which we will talk about in depth in just a moment. On November 17th, at approximately 12:15 p.m., the same day the accident occurred, just later in the day, Detective Troy Biscard, a police officer with the Denver Police Department, was assigned to investigate this fatal car crash. Detectives within the Traffic Investigation Bureau were interested in understanding whether any foul play had been involved. By around 1:20 p.m. that day, Detective Biscard was reviewing photographs of the scene, and his job was to determine how the accident happened. He had to base his determination on the photographs and the reports from the Traffic Investigation Bureau. And after looking through everything, he determined with confidence that Brittany's 2004 Pontiac Vibe was traveling northbound on the 100 block of South Yuma Street. I'm showing you right here. That's the dead-end street. It struck a red Mercury Sable, which was legally parked facing the opposite direction, as shown here in this picture. This was not a head-on collision. Her car hit the side of this vehicle right here. After she hit this vehicle, she continued past that area and struck a white Dodge van, presumably parked on the same side, but we don't see this vehicle because it was pushed past the dead-end road and down a hill. This is what caused Brittany's vehicle to spin in the opposite direction and come to a stop, facing south on Yuma Street. There's actually a drop here, and you can see from looking down at the pallets below, I'm circling it right here, that is a drop, and that's where the van ended up. The main issue that officers and detectives had was that the crash was bad, but they didn't think it was bad enough to cause someone to lose their life. Detective Biscard ascertained that they were driving back to Colorado Springs on I-25 prior to the crash. I'm showing you the map here, I-25, with downtown Denver here and Colorado Springs down here. You can see that Yuma Street is on the way, but it's still out of their way on the way home. They would actually have to get off the highway and then make their way down to this exact street. I took Google Maps and went on the exact path that Detective Biscard presumed they took. It was very odd to me. I kept thinking, how would they have ended up here? What landmarks were there? Had they ever been in this location before? Granted, Brittany played sports and there was a big park here with multi-use purposes where teams would gather for different events, but it was an hour and a half away from the base. So, I don't know why this would be a designated area for someone like Brittany. I couldn't really make sense of it, and I think detectives were feeling the same way. The street is just too out of the way, especially when their goal was to get home that night. The next thing that had to happen was Detective Biscard wanted to interview anyone who had been with Brittany and Robbie that night at the strip club. He wanted to get information about what the atmosphere was like and how Robbie had been interacting with Brittany. This is where we find out how he was shaking and crying, because witnesses, several of them, said that Robbie did not seem thrilled with the fact that Brittany was taking off her top. They were also able to confirm that both of them had been drinking and that they were seen leaving together around 12:30 in the morning. Since I don't know which strip club they were at, I can't tell you exactly how long it would have or should have taken them to get from that venue to Yuma Street. However, I did read the affidavit with the supporting information and found out that this strip club was north of Yuma Street. So I went ahead and found the furthest one north that I could find in Denver. I did this because I wanted to know what the furthest place they could have been at was and how long it would have taken them from that location to Yuma Street. It would have taken them approximately 27 minutes if they were at the venue that was furthest from Yuma Street. The reason this is important is because the crash happened at approximately 1:40 in the morning. Remember, witnesses said they left the strip club at 12:30, so that means it would have happened over an hour after they walked out those doors. Detectives were starting to realize that something wasn't adding up. Why did it take them an hour to go a few miles? He wanted to talk to Robbie, so he calls him up on the phone, and he wasn't able to shed much light on the cause of the accident. Robbie says he just nodded off prior to the crash. He told them he didn't even know what strip club they were at before the accident. However, he did say that he was sad that Brittany took off her top during the photo shoot, but that they did not argue about it on the way home. Brittany isn't alive to tell her story, the scene isn't providing much, and Robbie says it was an accident. So for now, everyone's waiting for the autopsy report to come back. The medical examiner, Dr. John Carver, conducted Brittany's autopsy. Brittany did hit the windshield, and that did cause the windshield to crack. But neither Brittany's neck nor her spinal cord were injured, and she wasn't suffering from a brain injury either. Since Brittany did not have injuries in any of those areas, Dr. Carver was concerned because those are the type of injuries that are typical in an accident like this, and he hoped that the toxicology report would prove to be of significance. It turns out, like I said, that her blood alcohol was over the legal limit, but not by much, and he found no other drugs in her system. She had no injuries to her internal organs, no broken bones in the base of her neck. It was all intact. Nothing was wrong with her spinal cord, skull, or brain. So what caused Brittany's death? What Brittany did have was severe bruising around her right eye on the orbital bone, her right temple, and her right cheek. What also stood out to him were some broken blood vessels in her face and in the whites of her eyes and on her cheeks. These were pinpoint hemorrhages, which are usually caused by prolonged asphyxiation. They're called petechial hemorrhages, and this is usually a telltale sign of strangulation or asphyxiation. But there's something very different about Brittany's anatomy genetically that made this case almost impossible to solve. The doctor could not concretely say that Brittany had been strangled simply by an internal exam because Brittany was born without the piece of cartilage in her neck that's usually broken during strangulation. In general, it's found to be fractured in 50% of cases of manual strangulation. It doesn't always break, so doctors usually look for other signs, like blood vessels in the eyes or even fingernail marks on the neck. The doctor could not rule this death a homicide just because there wasn't enough evidence to show it was. So what did the report say? Cause and manner of death, both undetermined. This is the equivalent of him saying, "I don't know what happened." Without a conclusive cause of death or homicide, there's no crime, and therefore no investigation would be warranted. This really frustrated Detective Biscard because he just had this feeling that foul play was involved, and he had to prove it. Barry Brashers was even more concerned after the medical examiner's findings. The fact that Brittany wasn't wearing her seatbelt really bothered him. He was a mess over her death. He had just lost his wife a few years before, and as the family was doing their best to move on from that, they lost another loved one they adored. It was almost too much for them to take. However, the sadness turned to anger when Barry found out that detectives thought foul play might have been involved. Something he told them right away was that Brittany never got into a car, whether she was driving or not, without putting on a seatbelt. The fact that she didn't have one on that night was a red flag. However, she wasn't sober either. Sometimes people act differently and make different choices when they're under the influence. It's truly hard to tell. Barry felt that Brittany was dead because of Robbie in one way or another. To what extent, he was not sure. He just wanted more information. He didn't want investigators to stop looking into his daughter's death. There was an issue, though. Homicide detectives can only work on homicides. They can't just investigate an undetermined death because their heart tells them to, or their mind thinks that something suspicious went on. They have to rely on the autopsy report. However, Biscard was determined to find something in Robbie's past that may lead him to uncover more. Brittany's best friend Tiffany was interviewed, and something significant was stated when she said that Brittany and Robbie had a rocky relationship to the point of hatred. She said she knew this because she actually heard a message that Robbie left on Brittany's phone. He was yelling at her after their altercation and said that he hated her and wished she was dead. That's pretty intense, but of course this is hearsay. They didn't actually have proof that it happened. But Tiffany was a responsible, credible witness, so it did cause Detective Biscard to pull up the facts that he did have in the police report from back in October. Something in that police report stood out. After that altercation with Robbie, Brittany told police that he had threatened to crash the car with both of them in it, hurting both of them. Biscard is even more determined to find a link, and they get a break when they're going through Brittany's phone. They were being as thorough as possible, as they should be, and they decide to play each and every one of her saved ringtones. If you don't remember, back in the day when we had ringtones, I don't even know if we still have ringtones. I don't, but you could download them and save them to folders and then use them. Why were they doing this? Well, honestly, sometimes it goes towards victimology. Who is your victim? Even the music they listen to matters because you're profiling your victim to piece their life together and their death. But what they found was kind of pure luck. It appeared to be just another ringtone, but it's almost as though Brittany was speaking to them from the grave. It's the voice message that Robbie left on her phone right after he was put in jail, the one that Tiffany had heard. Brittany saved it, but it was saved as a ringtone on purpose to disguise it. And thankfully Brittany did this because it gave detectives insight into another side of Robbie in a factual way, not just he said, she said.
Hey, you guys, I'm tired of defending you. You me over, I hate you.
The recording said, "I hate your effing guts. I'm tired of defending you. You effed me over. I effing hate you. I hope you effing die. I hate you." That's pretty bad. But detectives also know that people say things that they do not mean when they're passionately angry. I've witnessed it. I've actually heard people say these exact words to someone that they say they love. It's sad and it's not right, but it does happen. Does it mean Robbie really hoped that Brittany was dead? Who knows? But it doesn't 100% prove that he did anything. Going back to Tiffany for more information, detectives wanted to know if she knew anything that Robbie had done to Brittany that was violent in nature. Tiffany said that he would do all sorts of crazy things. Like, one time, he parked her car on a 4-lane road, turned it off, took out the keys, got out, and left her inside in the middle of traffic. Again, they didn't have proof of this, but it wasn't looking good for Robbie. However, you have to keep in mind that her friends disliked him, and now Brittany is dead. So detectives have more to go on, but that's not concrete. What was more concrete was Robbie's marriage records. Detectives combed over all the information they had, hoping that they would get in touch with his wife, Alina. Did she even know that he was having an affair? The way Robbie had spoken about Alina to Brittany, you would have thought that they had been married for a long time, but that wasn't the case. However, the couple had been together for a very long time as boyfriend and girlfriend, at least since high school. But get this, it was only earlier that year, the same year in January 2009, that Robbie and Elena got married. It was right before he was deployed to Iraq. They exchanged vows in the middle of a freezing cold winter night in a parking garage. Yes, it's not something you hear very often, or at all, a parking garage winter wedding. But that is where Elena became Mrs. Robbie Walters. According to what others related to detectives, Robbie told Elena he was leaving for Iraq, and then he said, "Listen, if we get married right now before I go, we can get a lot of benefits." Elena was hesitant. She had been with Robbie a long time. She did want to marry him, but she didn't want to marry him for money. She wanted to marry him because she loved him. And he told her, "Well, I love you too, this is just something extra." But it didn't seem like the truth, because just weeks later, when he was in Iraq with Brittany, he was carrying on a new relationship that would ultimately turn intimate and more. All behind Elena's back. Was it true then? Did he only marry her for the money and truly love Brittany? Well, one thing's for sure, Robbie had both women wrapped around his finger. Elena had found out about the affair. This is when Robbie was sent to jail. She found out he was cheating, and this can tear a relationship apart. I can't know for sure how Elena took it, but cheating could be one of those unforgivable betrayals. It definitely did not help their marriage, but it didn't lead to divorce either. When Robbie moved back to California after the car accident, Elena took him back despite everything he had done to her. Plus, she was even true to her own vows and would not speak to the investigators about Robbie. She stood by his side. But about 4 months later, in March 2010, an explosive fight erupted in the Walters household. Elena and Robbie were going at it with one another, and Detective Biscard got word of this. Because he was desperate for help on Brittany's case, he called Elena, hoping, in her anger, she would turn on Robbie, and he hoped that she would say something about Brittany's death. It turns out Elena does want to talk. Now granted, she is very mad. She's been cheated on, lied to, put in the middle of an investigation, her life was turned upside down. So how credible is an angry wife in this position? Well, detectives don't care, they're all ears. She doesn't even have to be asked any questions. She just went off. She said, "Rob, you killed Brittany," and he confessed everything to her. On March 29, 2010, at approximately 2:25 p.m., Elena spoke to Detective Biscard over the phone. I actually have some of this conversation I want to play for you in just a moment. The gist of it was that in the days after returning to California following the accident, Elena and Robbie had a number of intense conversations regarding Brittany and what happened that night. It was in one of these conversations, and several others, that Robbie started to confess that it wasn't an accident, that he actually killed Brittany and then staged the scene to look like she died in the car crash.
Hi, is Elena in?
This is her.
Hi, Elena. This is Detective Troy Bisgard. I'm a detective with the Denver Police Department.
And then he's like, "I did it." I'm like, "Did what?" He's like, "I killed her." And I was like, "Robbie, you're talking to me, but you've been through a lot." He's like, "No, I didn't. I think he said that they were on the freeway.
Okay.
Or the highway, something like that. And then that's the first time that he reaches over and he punches her in the face. First thing is he tried to stop her from breathing, so he kind of like pinned, pushed down with his forearm.
He said that he never planned to kill Brittany. It was when she took off her top that changed everything. I can't even imagine hearing all of this as his wife. Elena told them Robbie was different in the head. They had been together for so long, and it was difficult for her to accept that the person she loved this much was capable of such a horrible thing.
He's always had an imagination. He's always been different in the head. Like, so it's hard to think that this is this person that I know, who I've known my whole life.
After telling detectives this bombshell, she just keeps going and ends up talking to them for 2 hours. She even admitted that she had actual recordings of the times that Robbie confessed.
When I had my phone, it was in my boot, and I turned it on, I hit the record, and I got about a good 20 minutes of him talking about the whole affair.
One time, she tucked her phone into one of her boots with the video camera on, and although you can't see Robbie, you can only see a ceiling fan from the phone's vantage point, which I'm going to show you here. You can hear very clearly, though, Robbie's voice, but I'll also tell you exactly what was said. I'll warn you, this is heinous. He told his wife that he and Brittany were driving back to Colorado Springs on the highway, and they were arguing about her taking off her top during the photo shoot. That's when he punched Brittany in the face. Then, he grabbed the steering wheel, forced the car to exit the highway, and got out. He moved her to the passenger side, and got back into the driver's seat. He then drove to an unknown area and parked the car. Brittany was calling out his name and trying to scream, so he began to knee her in the face. He then stopped, and he couldn't believe what he had just done. He wanted to take her to the hospital, but at that point, he knew that she would tell on him, so he decided to finish her off wherever they were. At this point, the car got stuck in the snow, so he had to get out and began pushing on the bumper. That was when he realized that his hands, and now the bumper of the car, were bloody. He told Elena that this is when he got back into the driver's seat again and realized that Brittany was still breathing. He screamed at her, "Why don't you die?" That's just incredibly disgusting. He then got on top of her and, using his forearm, began to push down her throat, stopping her from breathing, and attempted to break her neck. As she lay there lifeless, he got back into the driver's seat and drove down a dark residential road, Zuma Street. He pushed her back into the driver's seat, made sure not to buckle her seatbelt, but buckled his own. Then he proceeded to accelerate the vehicle and swerve the steering wheel so the car would hit parked cars. The impact caused Brittany's head to hit the windshield. When the crash happened, Robbie said he purposely put on a show by screaming for help and crying out for people to help his dying girlfriend. Not only that, he confessed to Elena multiple times. According to her, on several of those occasions, she was able to record him on her phone. That is how we got these recordings. She also let investigators know that there had been 2 attempts on his own life, saying that he didn't want to go to prison. So why record these confessions but stay with this man and not go to the police? That was a big question that Detective Biscard had for her because she knew this was wrong. But they assumed it could also be because she wanted to get back at him at some point, like a moment like this where they were now separated. Those were some cold words, some very cruel statements that came out of Robbie's mouth, and I wish I had never heard them. I didn't know what to think, as I'm sure the detectives didn't either. He said, "I looked over and just took a shot in the dark where I thought her head would be, and boom. I punched the girl with all of my might. She felt it. She felt it like a fucking house dropped on her. I hit her hard. I couldn't stop. Boom, 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 boom." Then she let out a small squeal like, "Robbie?" And then she goes, "Ah," like she's trying to scream. How can someone even be so heartless? Now, I don't know the context of that one part of the recording, but detectives want to know if this is true. And if you really thought it was, why didn't you come to the police before? Well, Elena explains that no one was looking for Robbie as far as committing a crime was concerned. She even told some of her friends, and they were kind of like, maybe he's blowing smoke, trying to act like a cool guy, maybe even trying to make Elena dislike Brittany, or believe that he disliked Brittany so that she would forget about the pain that he caused from cheating on her. Maybe Robbie wanted to paint Brittany as a slut with a topless story, making it look like the cheating had been her fault. And it's true, men do this and women do too. Her friend told her, "Listen, no one is going after Robbie for murder, so it must not be true, and it would be a big deal if Elena were to come forward first." So, after this confession comes out, Detective Biscard speaks with a medical examiner, Dr. Carver, on March 30th. He tells him about the statements that Robbie made. The medical examiner looks back over the autopsy report and is now able to seemingly make sense of his initial observations that were confusing for him, like the bruising around the eye, the temple, and the cheek area. Her face would have been facing him if he were in the passenger seat, and it made sense that these injuries would have been caused by Robbie punching her while they were driving in the car. Also, with him saying he put his forearm across her throat instead of fingers around her neck, that made sense because there were no signs of fingernail marks or anything resembling a hand. Well, that was that. Dr. Carver had enough additional information in the form of Robbie's actual words to change the manner of death to homicide. Now a true investigation could begin, and I had so many thoughts up to this point, but with such a detailed confession, there really doesn't seem to be any question about what happened, right? Or was there? 3 days later, Detective Biscard flew out to California with a warrant for Robbie's arrest. They brought him in for questioning, and when asked if he knew why he was there, this is what he said.
Do you know what you're under arrest first-degree murder.
He said that the very last thing he told Brittany was, "I love you, Brittany," and she responded, "I love you too, Robbie." But this sweet talking wasn't working on Detective Biscard. He had seen her injuries and knew how they were on the right side of her face. He had also heard the recordings of Robbie admitting what he did, but Robbie didn't know this. So the detective started to call his bluff by explaining he was an experienced homicide detective, and something didn't add up.
I'm a homicide detective, and I look at, well, I've seen all that stuff before. The stuff on her neck, the stuff on her face. All the right side. Right. Because you're sitting on her right side.
The detective told Robbie about hearing the crazy things he did, like leaving Brittany in the car in the middle of the road, but Robbie denied it. Then, Detective Biscard told Robbie that they had heard the voice message on Brittany's phone. When asked why he would leave such a bad message, Robbie said that he couldn't believe Brittany would call the cops on him and put him in jail. He was upset, but he claimed he didn't mean those words. But wasn't he upset on the night of the crash too? He had purposely mentioned Brittany taking off her shirt when questioned about the incident. It seemed like that was significant to him, and he was really upset. But how upset was he? Well, we know it was enough to make him cry, but was it enough to kill her? That was the question. Detective Biscard went one step further and admitted that they had a recording from his own estranged wife, in his own words, confessing to killing Brittany. Suddenly, Robbie went silent. He just stopped after saying, "I don't know what the fall to tell you anymore." This wouldn't be the last time Robbie spoke. He decided to do interviews with the media from his jail cell. Robbie was incarcerated in Denver until his trial began in August of 2011. When journalists came to speak with Robbie about what was said in Elena's videos, Robbie's defense was that Elena was the one who would hound him regarding what happened to Brittany, as though she wanted him to say that he killed her. So sometimes, to quiet her down, he would sarcastically go along with it, saying, "Okay, Elena, you're totally right. I broke her neck. Elena, you got me." He didn't know she was recording the conversation. He insinuated that Elena was setting him up to get back at him, and he called her evil for what she did.
She would come over with these accusations, and then there were times where I just agreed with her to get the conversation to end. If I just was like, "Yeah, Elena, you're totally right. You're totally right, Elena. I broke her neck. It's totally my fault." Little did I know she was recording the conversation. So evil.
When questioned about the taped confession and crashing the car himself from the passenger side, he kept asking reporters if they actually thought that sounded like it was even possible. Well, I looked up Robbie's height. He's 6'1". So yeah, I do think it's possible to use your leg to press the gas pedal hard enough to cause that car to crash. But Robbie denied it. Prosecutors Phil Geigel and Helen Morgan were assigned to Brittany's case. Despite Detective Biscard's opinion that he had provided enough information for the state to prove that Robbie murdered Brittany, the state wanted Elena to testify at Robbie's trial. However, she remained devoted to her husband even after his arrest and everything else she knew about him. In fact, she helped Robbie plan his defense. It is unbelievable, but you have to remember, Elena married Robbie not for the Air Force benefits, but for love. She was committed to standing by her husband no matter what, because they had been together since they were teens. Elena knew nothing else but Robbie. However, the prosecution had evidence that Robbie had put a hit out on Elena to shut her up. That's when she changed her mind and decided to testify against him. When Brittany's dad walked into that courtroom and saw Robbie, he wanted to hit him, just like Robbie had said he had hit his daughter. Using Robbie's own words against him during the trial, Prosecutor Geigel repeated the chilling statements from Elena's recording for the jury. He did this in his opening statement. They had their theory of what happened that fateful night in November. Prosecutors believed that when the couple left the strip club, Robbie confronted Brittany about taking off her shirt. They believed that the couple sat somewhere talking, which turned into an argument, and that's why it took them so long to travel to the destination where they ended up, where the crash happened. They theorized, knowing Brittany's personality, how independent she was, and how strong she was as a woman, that she most likely took the position of mind your own business when it came to Robbie getting upset over her photo shoot. They weren't dating, so what gave him the right to tell her what to do or to judge her? They believed this is what set Robbie off. On top of the fact that he had lost her as a girlfriend, he was a controlling, narcissistic man. He was used to getting women to bend at his command. When Brittany didn't, he became enraged. Whatever words were exchanged, prosecutors think it set him off, and in his own words, he said he was on a mission to kill her once that top came off. Why? No one knows. But they think it began by hitting Brittany while they were on the highway on I-25. Apparently, 2 911 calls had come in that night from someone driving alongside them. A concerned citizen called the police when they saw a car that stopped abruptly in the middle of a busy highway. From the description that the caller gave, they think this was Brittany's vehicle. We already know from Robbie's own words what happened next. He took the wheel and eventually got into the driver's seat, moving the car somewhere. He continued his evil plan. Now here's one of my favorite pieces of evidence. A blood expert came in and said it was evident by the blood evidence in the car that Brittany was already bleeding before the accident happened. The reason being, there was blood found on the airbag. Now hear me out. It might seem like, okay, wait a minute, we know that her head hit the windshield. We see the windshield is cracked. However, because the airbag is so quick to come out and then deflate afterward, according to the blood analyst, it wouldn't have been able to gather as much blood as we see on it when it came out. It would have prevented some of that impact, right? They said because this happened so fast, they theorized she was already bleeding. However, the defense had their own blood analyst who said the exact opposite. They said, nope, the airbag came out. She was laying on it for some time after the injury to her head. But we know that the injuries weren't as significant from her head hitting that windshield, according to the professional who did the autopsy. We know that the injuries happened on the right side of her face, and it is confusing because here I am looking at the airbag and we can see the mark on it. It looks like it's on the left side. So this leaves a lot of questions still. The case really hung on Elena's testimony. She knew Robbie best. When she was interviewed about Robbie confessing to her, she said that while he was doing that, he was also threatening her life, telling her if she said anything, he would kill her. So now we know why she didn't say anything. But guess what? They didn't just have to rely on Elena's words because, during the recording, he actually says to her, he's so close to killing her right now. He just wanted to punch her. And yet, she's still saying, he loves me. Is that what women like Elena thought? Is that why they stick by their man's side? Because even while this man is awaiting trial and he's incarcerated, she would talk to him, take his calls, and she actually believed him when he said, oh, I was just saying that to you. None of it really happened. Elena said that she loved him, and he actually said, if you really do, then you have the opportunity to prove that. He wants her to lie for him, to say he was drunk when he confessed, that it wasn't real. What was even more damning came from the time that Robbie was in jail. Even from behind bars, he was scheming. Robbie thought he had Elena under his thumb and that he could guide her testimony to benefit him. But the more time he spent in jail, the more he realized she was a real liability. So, he sought the assistance of a fellow prisoner. He was trying to find someone to kill his wife. Robbie, who I told you was narcissistic and proud, believed that the hit would happen, not realizing that the co-conspirator had turned him in. When Robbie asked the inmate to help him find a hitman to kill Elena, the prisoner turned into a state witness for a lesser sentence. Not only was Robbie charged with murder, but now he was also facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder. After Elena found out that Robbie wanted to hire someone to kill her, she decided to testify against him. That didn't stop Robbie. He still thought he could win Elena over with his charm, and he would pathetically plead to her not to fall for the prosecution's lies. When Elena told him she was done believing anything that came out of his mouth, I'm so proud of her for that. She went on to become the state's star witness. Robbie later told a journalist with 48 hours that Elena was the cold-hearted one. He literally said, and I quote, "The second most painful thing I've ever had to go through was watching her get on the stand and just cold-blooded, with no emotion, totally heartless, without even looking at me. Not even once. Even when they said, point out Mr. Robert Walters, she didn't even look at me. She just said, "He's over there." She was just like a puppet. She just wanted revenge on me because I fell in love with someone else and I broke her heart. End quote. The jury would make the final decision. Barry was at the point where, if Robbie got off on the charges, he would take justice into his own hands. As crazy as it sounds, he said, "One of us is going to do a life sentence." But thankfully, after deliberating for only 2 days, the jury returned a verdict and found Robert Walters guilty of the first-degree murder of Brittany Brashers. When Robbie heard the verdict, he later said that he felt hopeless and sickened. However, the state did do him one solid. They dropped the charges of conspiracy to commit murder, so at least there's that as some kind of consolation prize. And I had to laugh because he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. So, what does it even matter? He made his bed. A couple of other noteworthy things that I thought you might want to know. Despite Robbie's guilty verdict, Barry Brashers said that he didn't revel in it. Brittany was never coming back, no matter what. Brittany's brother John believes justice hasn't been served because his sister is dead and Robbie is still alive. Robbie's sister, Sarah, addressed the court on behalf of the Brashers family at Robbie's sentencing hearing. She wanted everyone in the courtroom to know how incredible Brittany was. John, Brittany's brother, says Brittany taught him to enjoy life because tomorrow might be the last. Robbie believes Detective Biscard is the villain and has a long list of things the detective did wrong during the investigation. According to Robbie, the detective twisted everything, and he also forced the medical examiner to change their report. Robbie claims that Detective Biscard flew to California and persuaded Elena to testify against him because he knew she was loyal to him. In California, recording someone without their knowledge is illegal, and Robbie said he didn't think that the Colorado judge who presided over his trial should have allowed it as evidence because the state used an illegal recording during his trial. Robbie believed he had a high chance of winning an appeal without that recording. Even the prosecutors admit they would not have been able to put Robert Walters behind bars for Brittany's murder without Elena's testimony. Elena and Robbie soon divorced, and Robbie appealed, but it was denied in February 2016. Robert Walters is currently incarcerated at Limon Correctional Facility in Limon, Colorado. And lo and behold, he's got a prison dating profile, as I like to call them, on writeaprisoner.com. Robbie has a pen pal profile, and his About section reads, "I'm Robbie, 6'1", 180 pounds, fit AF." And then he puts in parentheses, "I'm pretty sure AF stands for as a fiddle and nothing more crass than that." He really thinks that's funny. I guess he doesn't get help much and never will. He goes on to say, "Did you ever see the painting that Vincent van Gogh did of me? I use it as my profile picture. I made the skull myself in a vocational welding program they have at this facility. I call it self-portrait in stainless steel. Up until recently, I spent most of my time welding. Now I'm a little bit more focused on working out and writing. I made all kinds of clever creations in carpentry before I started welding, but I still love woodworking. I just enjoy creating poems, statues, coffee tables, collages, whatever. I've been down for over 12 years now and wanted to see if I still had any kind of appeal to anyone out in the real world. If I sparked interest, then shoot an address and I'll write you back. Take it easy." Barry Brashers wants everyone to remember his daughter as vibrant, beautiful, and full of life. We aren't promised tomorrow. I hope each and every one of us lives our lives to the fullest and never encounters anyone as horrible as Robert Walters. At 21, you spend your free time jamming on the drums with your best friends in your heavy metal band, while also enjoying moments with your new girlfriend. One day, your girlfriend isn't feeling well, so you head out to grab her something to eat, hoping it'll lift her spirits. But that was the last time Matt was seen. He vanished during that brief trip, and now I'm here to tell you what really happened to him. Matthew Robert Landry was born October 26, 1987, to Doreen and Robert Bob Landry. Matt was the youngest of 5 children. He had 2 older sisters, Christina and Gina, and 2 older brothers, Christopher and Douglas. Matt Landry loved skateboarding. He was a jokester. He liked to play all kinds of pranks on his friends and make people laugh. He was the typical boy next door, with a little flair. His friends knew there would never be a dull moment hanging out with Matt because he would constantly keep you on your toes. His core group of friends were a group of guys that he started a band with, and they had been playing together for many years. He considered his bandmates his best friends. By the time Matt was 21 years old, he loved two things in life more than anything: his new girlfriend Francesca Bomarito and music, specifically playing the drums. Matt and his best friends had a heavy metal band, and they would frequently get together to jam out in one of the band members' basements. So they basically had a basement fan, and they were the happiest when they were playing music, especially Matt. Matt playing drums, and this guy has some serious talent. And although their band wasn't famous and they only played one paying gig, by 2009, they had big plans and even bigger dreams, especially for guys living in Chesterfield Township, Michigan. Today's case is taking us to yet another township, and it's in Michigan. Matt lived with his parents in Chesterfield Township, Michigan. Chesterfield Township is a charter township of Macomb County, and the population was about 34,000 back in 2009. It's north of Detroit, off of Anchor Bay, which is part of Lake St. Clair. Like many other townships, it consists of an area that has typical stores and restaurants, etc. But then it's surrounded by somewhat of a less built-up area. You can see it right here on the map. The middle section consists of all the businesses, and then just outside this line, there's more land and buildings. This is the area that Matt lived in with his parents. From what I could gather, I believe this may have been the home they lived in. It was a quaint little quiet neighborhood with houses pretty close together and close-knit. So, let's jump to the summer of 2009. Matt was 21, and he had just recently started dating Francesca. She also loved music and played the bass guitar. They had similar loves for movies and music and would spend hours watching movies at friends' houses. Although Matt had no trouble shining when he had drumsticks in his hands, he was a shy, quiet type of guy, more reserved than outgoing, a sweet, shy guy. Even when it came to getting into a relationship with Francesca, it started as a friendship. It was Francesca who really made the moves to make it more. She would invite Matt to come over and hang out, and he'd say yes. She would ask him again and again, and finally he decided to stay over one night. Everyone that knew Matt knew how much he cared about Francesca. His parents, Doreen and Bob, knew their son so well. They were very close to Matt, and they were in contact with him daily, especially his mom. He was a regular texter and caller, always keeping in touch with those he cared about, especially his best friends in his band, his mom Doreen, and now Francesca, his new girlfriend. Doreen knew this relationship was for real because Matt would just light up anytime he would mention Francesca's name. She lived about 20 minutes away from Matt in a town called Roseville. Both of them worked part-time jobs where their shifts varied. They could be on the clock until very late at night, with Francesca working at a restaurant and Matt at a pizza place called Dolly's Pizza, delivering pizzas about 8 minutes away from his house. Anytime they were not working, they would try to spend time together, even if it meant waiting up for the other's shift to end and having to start their hangout sessions late into the night or even the early morning after midnight. It didn't matter because they were in love and they wanted to be together whenever they could. On the afternoon of Saturday, August night, 2009, Matt had a session with his bandmates, and then he had to work a shift at Dolly's by the evening. Still working, Matt called his mom, worried he wouldn't be able to finish his shift because something was wrong with his green 2004 four-door Honda Accord. He told her that his car alarm kept randomly going off, which was very distracting while driving and to those on the road. So he asked her if she could swing by the house and grab her car so he could finish up his deliveries. And of course, she said yes. So he made his way over there, parked his car in the driveway, and took his mother's car back to Dolly's, using it for his deliveries until his shift ended later that night. It was close to midnight, and he was still waiting for Francesca to end her shift at the restaurant, so he went home to kill some time before they met up. It was around 2:30 in the morning when, while Doreen's husband Bob slept through a storm that was raging outside, Doreen was kept awake by the thunder and the bright lightning outside. She chose to open a book and read in the living room, leaving her husband Bob upstairs in bed sleeping. Matt was getting ready to leave for Francesca's house. He told his mom he was going to try to see what was wrong with his car before he left, so he went outside. While Doreen watched him from the living room window, she saw Matt walk around his car in the driveway, trying to figure out what to do. He knew the car alarm kept sounding off without warning, but they didn't know why. So his mom was actually hoping the alarm wouldn't start blaring right now because it was 2:55 a.m. She didn't want anyone in their quiet little neighborhood to be woken up by the alarm. But nevertheless, Doreen couldn't do much except watch her son as he tried to gently lift up the car hood just enough. Then he set the alarm off, just as she expected he would. He panicked, so he hopped into his car and sped off down the street to move his car out of the neighborhood and not wake anyone up. It was about time for Matt's girlfriend Francesca to finish her shift at the restaurant where she worked, so he just drove right to her place. Matt arrived at Francesca's with a bottle of wine in hand, and they stayed up late, having a really fun night together. But by the next morning, Francesca was not feeling well. This was a little disappointing because Matt had planned to take her to a backyard family barbecue later that afternoon, back at his parents' house. He really wanted her to meet his sister Gina's boyfriend. However, Matt was more concerned with caring for Francesca and nursing her back to health than the barbecue. Besides, he knew that Francesca wasn't going anywhere and would have plenty of other opportunities to meet his family. Her well-being came first. That was Matt's nature, to be the caregiver, which he probably got from his own mother, being so kind and loving as she was. So he made Francesca a hot bath, got her a cup of tea, and brought her a thermometer to take her temperature. He was just doing whatever he could as a caring boyfriend. After a little while, Francesca still wasn't feeling that great. She was running a fever, so Matt called his mom to let her know what was going on and even asked her, "What do you think I could do? Is there anything else I could do for Francesca?" His mom thought that Matt was doing everything he possibly could and just hoped that Francesca would feel better. Matt told his mom that Francesca was going to take a little nap, and when she woke up, they would both come over. Doreen was looking forward to it. She said what she does to all of her kids before ending each and every phone call with them: "I love you." Matt replied, "I love you too, Mom." Matt had to do some errands, so he figured he would get them done while Francesca slept. But before leaving, he asked her if she wanted anything, if she was hungry or wanted food. Initially, she accepted the offer, but then she soon realized her stomach wasn't ready for food, so she declined. She decided to take that nap, and Matt left to go get some stuff done. He told her that he would come back when he was finished, then wake her up, and they would go over to his place for that family barbecue that evening. And when Francesca woke up, expecting to find Matt at her side, but as she looked around, he wasn't there. She looked at the time and realized it was much later than she expected, 5:47 p.m. She thought Matt would wake her up before 5, so they could make it to his parents' barbecue. So she was confused and called Matt's phone. She got no answer. She texted him, but still nothing. She was just sitting there, staring at her phone, waiting for something to happen. She figured maybe he was still out running errands, so she waited for him to call or show up. But while doing so, she fell back to sleep. Meanwhile, back at Matt's parents' house, the barbecue had already begun. Doreen had noticed that her son and his girlfriend hadn't made it, but she just figured Francesca ended up too under the weather to attend and didn't think much else of it. Who would? You don't expect anything out of the ordinary to be wrong just because your 21-year-old son and his girlfriend don't show up to a barbecue after telling you they may not make it. But where was Matt? That's the question his family and loved ones would soon be asking each other. Francesca woke up yet again and started to worry because Matt continued to ignore her calls and not get back to her, which was highly unlike him. He was in constant contact with her and others, and he would always answer. If he didn't, he would call right back within just a few minutes, not hours. It was 7:31 p.m, no Mavu, when she called him again, with no answer. No text back, nothing. All kinds of thoughts were going through her mind because you don't immediately go to thinking something bad is happening. The initial thought can be that it's a person's choice not to answer. They're too busy, mad at you, or even in the case of a couple, maybe they're with someone else. So, it's frustrating. You care about this person and you want to know what's going on. By 9:01 p.m., Matt was still not answering Francesca's calls. So she started to think of something more sinister as an explanation. Now she was feeling very worried about Matt's well-being. As I said, you go through those stages, you're frustrated, you're angry, and then you start getting worried. Then you almost get sick to your stomach with worry, just wondering what in the world is going on. And you freak out. She started thinking maybe he got into a car accident, or his car got stuck in a ditch. After all, his car was giving him issues the past few days. Francesca's mind could not stop thinking of all the worst-case scenarios. She did not know what else to do, so she started to contact local hospitals and police departments to see if anyone matching Matt's description was there. But they didn't have anyone matching the information about Matt, reported as being injured or in trouble. It wasn't only Francesca who was concerned about Matt. On Sunday evening, Matt's childhood friend Chris Emmerich, who was also in his band, was concerned. He was in constant contact with his friends. Matt suddenly turned radio silent. He was the type of person who would text his friends all day long, hourly. So Chris was concerned and actually got in his car, starting to drive the route he knew Matt would typically take, thinking that he would find Matt's car stranded or wrecked on the side of the road. After trying to find Matt but having no luck, Chris contacted his mother, Doreen, around 9 p.m. to tell her he thought something was very wrong because he couldn't get a hold of Matt. His mom thought he was with his girlfriend, Francesca. And it's so important to have friends like this. Friends who know your routine, your character, your family, so they can quickly piece things together when something doesn't feel right. Doreen was immediately concerned when she figured out that Francesca hadn't heard from him either. In moments like these, I see a pattern. As humans, we want to do what we can with what we know. We want to use our expertise to help in some way, whether it's just to alleviate our fears or to dispel those bad thoughts. We take action. Matt's mother was a banker, so she got to work pulling up Matt's bank records to look at where he may have used his debit card last. Doreen was able to see Matt's debit card activity, but it did not alleviate her fears. She had been in the banking industry a long time and was very well versed in spotting fraudulent charges right away. Red flags started going up for her. There were 3 suspicious transactions made, 3 from the same location, back to back. All 3 were $100 withdrawals from an ATM, and it wasn't one close by. That was another red flag for her. These transactions were made from a gas station on 7 Mile Road in Detroit, Michigan. Detroit streets use a mile road system. One of the most famous is 8 Mile Road, where Marshall Mathers, aka Eminem, was born. Rapper and videographer Darnell Williams said that 8 Mile is hugely popular because of the movie, but it is the last point before the suburbs. According to Darnell Williams, 7 Mile Road is the actual city of Detroit, and the 7 Mile Road area at this point was overrun with gangs, drugs, and violence. Police officers in this area didn't even conduct night patrols anymore because it was so dangerous. Instead, bounty hunters were hired to deal with the criminals. Doreen's stomach twisted into knots. What was her son, who had just been nursing his sick girlfriend back to health, doing near 7 Mile Road in Detroit? It was at least a 30-minute drive out of the way from anywhere she knew he would normally go. She was at a loss, trying to figure out why he would be in such a scary part of town, with burned-out houses littering the area, which was basically a death trap. Doreen also knew how careful Matt was with his money. Matt would avoid ATMs with processing fees if he could. He would have gone to his local bank. He would not have made 3 withdrawals back to back, costing him an extra $6. She also checked her son's phone records and saw that the last time he actually used his phone was at 4:15 p.m. on Sunday. After that, it was shut off and never back on. That was very concerning. By the next morning, Monday, August 11, Doreen and Bob decided they needed to go down to the local Chesterfield Township Police Department and report Matt missing. By this time, most of Matt's close friends, including his girlfriend, Francesca, had spoken to Matt's parents, so Doreen was able to give the police all the information they had. From the last calls Matt made from his phone, according to his phone records, to the calls made to him by his friends and Francesca, and the last place he was, which was at her place. She also gave them information about the bank transactions all the way out in Detroit. Now, what happens next? I understand that there are a lot of procedures and processes in place when police are contacted about somebody being missing, especially when it's an adult. And in this case, Matt was 21 years old, and they're only working with the information they have. But it seems like in a lot of cases, the cops are very judgmental. That's their first response. We've heard this time and time before. He's an adult, he's a grown man. Like it matters if you're a man or a woman, that it should be taken less seriously if you're a man, as though a man can take care of himself. Leave him alone, type of thing. They tell Doreen and Bob that Matt is a grown man who can make his own choices, and he was free to leave town, even though he lived with his parents. He didn't have to let them know where he was going. They also tell Matt's parents they need to wait, that it was very common for a 21-year-old to get drunk or high all night and then pass out at a friend's house and not call until the next day. Now mind you, he actually hadn't been seen since Sunday evening. And as far as anyone close to him was concerned, he wasn't out partying. He was taking care of his girlfriend and running some errands and even planned to go to a family barbecue. So his parents were sitting there thinking, "No, you don't know our son." And we hear that a lot. They were like, "You don't know our son. You don't know what's going on here." And in this case, Doreen and Bob actually spoke up and said, "That's not our son. That's not what he would be doing. It's out of character." Especially not speaking to anyone for the rest of the entire day and not getting in contact with them by Monday when his phone was off. So the police finally give in and they tell Matt's parents, "We'll go ahead and put Matt in our system." But another reason the Chesterfield Township Police weren't really taking it seriously was because it was out of their jurisdiction, so to speak. Matt lived in Chesterfield Township, but he was last seen in Roseville at Francesca's house. So his parents were told that they should be calling Roseville Police Department, and they had to wait 24 hours to make an official report. So that's what they did. They waited. Meanwhile, something else completely out of the ordinary was happening in another township, so close to Chesterfield. The Roseville PD got a call that a man had just tried to rob a bank in Harrison Township. It's 16 minutes south of Chesterfield and between Chesterfield and Roseville, and it got worse. Police were notified that a young woman, only 19 years old, almost lost her life. She was held at gunpoint, so they rushed over to find out what in the world was going on. This was highly unusual for this area. When the officers arrived, they found 19-year-old Sarah Maynard, shaken beyond belief, along with staff and customers. They were telling their terrifying stories about what just happened. Sarah Maynard was on her way to cash her very first paycheck. She had just started a new job at a dog kennel. She gets out of her car to enter the Flagstar Bank branch, and she felt like someone was watching her. We've all felt that strange feeling. She turns around and notices a man with sunglasses lurking behind her. While Sarah did feel creeped out, this wasn't that uncommon, so she shrugged it off and just told herself she was being overdramatic. While she ignored this man, she walked into the bank, handed her check to the teller, and just as she did so, Sarah felt a cold metal muzzle of a gun being pushed into the back of her head with force. CCTV footage from inside this bank captured the entire event, and it is chilling to watch. As he held the gun to Sarah with his other hand on her throat, the man told her to give him $50,000 or he would kill her. This is completely terrifying. An ordinary trip to the bank and your life hangs in the balance. The teller explained to the man that she did not have that much cash, but the robber continued to threaten Sarah's life. So the teller, eventually desperate, opened the drawer and gave him everything she had. After this, the man let go of Sarah, and she turned around. She saw that the man who was threatening her was the same one who had been staring at her as she entered the bank. She was now face to face with this dangerous man. He wasn't done either. He walked around the bank, collecting wallets and cash from all of the terrified customers. He continued to threaten their lives, waving and pointing his gun at them. Can you even imagine the fear? It's unbelievable, and it's not over yet. What happens next is even more horrifying. He goes right back over to Sarah with his gun in hand, and he threatened her again. he told her to come with him or he would kill her. This next part is so important. Please listen to this. Listen to what Sarah did. Sarah bravely refused. She sat down on the ground and told him no, she wouldn't move. She used all of her force to stay right there, glued to that bank floor no matter what. With time going by, the frustrated bank robber tried to pull her up repeatedly and repeated his demands over and over. But eventually, he gave up and fled. When the Harrison Township investigators examined the footage and saw what this suspect was capable of, they were stunned. This man was brazen, bold, and not afraid. When burglars walk into banks, they usually try to draw as little attention to themselves as possible. They'll just leave a note with the teller. But the Flagstar bank robber didn't seem to care, and the investigators believed that this robber would have done anything necessary to get what he wanted. They were surprised that he left Sarah behind and that he hardly even disguised himself. The investigator said that what Sarah did saved her life. That was a very important lesson for me to take away here. Sarah was interviewed later, and she said that, either way, something bad could have happened, but she didn't want to find out what if she went with him. At least if he decided to hurt her at the bank, the videos and the eyewitnesses would know what he did. She made the right choice. It won't always end positively like it did for Sarah, but it was an important takeaway. So you might be wondering what Sarah has to do with Matt and his case. Well, for one thing, these township police departments and the Roseville Police Department are now dealing with two unusual reports. Matt being missing and the suspicious ATM transactions, and now this bank robbery is so close in proximity. So it does correlate to them, coupled together in such a short time frame and proximity-wise. They needed to keep both of these incidents in mind as they went forward. And it's a very good thing they did, because I'm going to tell you what happens next and how this all connects. Now at that 24-hour mark, the Landrys, along with Francesca, decide it's time to make that official missing persons report, because they had to wait that designated time frame. We've all heard this. So on Monday evening, the 11th, they still kind of gave them the same song and dance at the Roseville Police Department that Chesterfield did. But thankfully, there was one detective, Scott Blackwell. He was overhearing everything that was going on, and when they were done speaking with an officer, Detective Blackwell wanted to talk to Doreen. She was the one who went out of her way to get all the records, Matt's debit card transactions at the gas station on 7 Mile Road in Detroit. She told him that Matt used his debit card at Quiznos Subs in East Point at 2:33 p.m. That was the very last transaction before all of the strange withdrawals. The Quiznos made sense to Doreen because it's somewhere that he would eat frequently and it was close by. But the other transactions made an hour later, all the way in Detroit, were not normal. I mean, all of Matt's money had been withdrawn from his account, and even though his parents were hoping it was him who made these transactions, it really just did not make sense. So Detective Blackwell saw the red flags go up, and he was interested in this case. He told them that he would do whatever he could to try to figure out what was going on. Detective Blackwell flagged Matt's green Honda as a wanted vehicle on the Law Enforcement Information Network. Then he went to the Sunoco gas station because he wanted to find out if they had video surveillance cameras that would help him right away. Because if Matt was on video, it would ease his parents' minds. Maybe he did leave town, but if it was someone else on those videos, then they needed to look into this further. Detective Blackwell got to the gas station and began talking with the owner, Moses Rahim. Detective Blackwell requested to view the CCTV footage from the security system shortly before 3:30 p.m. on Sunday, August 9th, when Matt's debit card transactions occurred. It was actually pure luck that Moses Rahim was able to help. If they had needed footage of that ATM area just 3 days before this happened, there wouldn't be any. He told Detective Blackwell he was lucky because only 3 days ago, Moses had gone to Sam's Club specifically to buy a high-end security camera to capture a blind spot that his old camera didn't catch, right where the ATM was. For some reason, Moses was not only compelled to buy a new system to include that spot, but he also felt the urge to set it up immediately. It was the weekend when he purchased it, and Moses' son, Issa, tried to convince him that they didn't need to install the camera. He suggested, "Let's do it on Monday." However, Moses was adamant that they replace the system that day. And thankfully they did, because what they captured on video took Matt's case in a totally different direction. Although Detective Blackwell felt lucky to have found this footage, watching it gave him a really bad feeling at 3:30 p.m., about an hour after Matt's card had been used at the Quiznos subs. Moses Rahim's state-of-the-art Sam's Club security camera captured someone other than Matt using Matt's debit card at the gas station. And while Detective Blackwell dreaded having to tell Doreen and Bob Landry what he had just seen, he didn't hesitate to call them and let them know it was not their son on that video. The Landrys were really hoping there would be a reasonable explanation for why Matt wasn't in contact with them. They were even hoping that the police were right, that maybe he was high or drunk and passed out somewhere. But Detective Blackwell had evidence that pointed to something way more sinister. And I'm going to get back to that and everything else that was on that video, because Blackwell had to wait to get a copy of it. By the next day, on Tuesday, August 12th, the family was passing out flyers with Matt's photo and all of his information on it. They even checked auto repair stores, thinking that maybe his car was broken down, as he attempted to buy items to fix it. Francesca had resorted to checking dumpsters, and it's sad, but she was so desperate to find out what happened to the man she loved. She was driving from Roseville south into Detroit, checking along every major road in any store or restaurant that had dumpsters behind them. And as Francesca dug through trash, she could not believe that this is what her life had become. Francesca and Matt were watching movies and making plans for their future just a few days before this, and now he was missing, and she was searching through the garbage for his dead body, which was unreal. And what happens next was also some kind of luck, or maybe the fact that both the police and Matt's loved ones were both retracing his assumed steps. But Francesca saw a lot of police activity right when she was about to make it into Detroit and closer to 7 Mile Road. She saw cop cars just whizzing past her with their sirens blaring, and she decided to follow them. It was in this approximate area, Rossini Drive, and obviously the police had found something big. Francesca hoped it wasn't Matt's body, and as she got closer, she didn't see Matt, but she did see something familiar. It was Matt's green Honda Accord. It was abandoned on the side of the road on Rossini Drive and Hayes Street. It was around 4 miles away from 7 Mile Road, and only 2 minutes from the Sunoco gas station where those ATM transactions were made. Francesca knew it was Matt's car right away, so she got out of her car and made her way over to the police officers. She was so determined and brave, and she was able to explain everything, who she was, and even able to put one of the officers on the phone with Matt's mom. And that's huge. And I'm going to tell you right now, Matt's loved ones were pivotal in solving this case. Some may argue they did more than the police so far. Matt's mom was the one pulling the bank statements and locating the gas station where suspicious transactions took place. And Francesca had her boots on the ground from Roseville into Detroit, looking for her boyfriend. She's now able to connect this officer to Matt's mom, Doreen. And he provides a clue. He tells her there are maps inside Matt's car in the passenger seat. At first, this wasn't something that seemed out of place. Matt was a pizza delivery driver. Doreen said it would not have been uncommon for him to use maps to make sure he found the correct locations. But then, I thought back to 2009. I'm pretty sure we had maps on our iPhones. However, when I Googled it, it turns out iPhones didn't have Apple Maps until 2012. However, they did have Google Maps, but I don't recall the accuracy of them. Could there be another reason for these maps to be in Matt's car? Matt delivered pizza locally, so unless he was trying to make his way well out of town, maybe it would be odd for him to have maps. The police towed the car to a garage at the Chesterfield Township Police Department for processing. By that night, Matt's face and story were all over the local news stations, along with Sarah Menard's hair-raising brush with death at the Flagstar Bank. And watching the news that night was one of the investigators from the Roseville Police Department, Lieutenant Raymond Blarick. Now, this news report of the bank robbery showcased that horrific footage from the CCTV camera, including the robber with the sunglasses on and poor Sarah in his grasp. This case had nothing to do with the Roselle PD for now anyway, since it happened in Harrison Township. But it was shocking to him as a mere citizen of the area, and he was glued to the screen, taking in every detail. And good thing he was, because by the next day, he would be using that news segment to somehow connect the dots to form conclusions in Matt's case. Someone else from Matt's inner circle had become aware of the evidence in this case. It was Matt's dad's best friend, Christopher Manning. Hearing that his best friend's 21-year-old son had vanished, he was not just going to sit around and do nothing. Someone had to stay at the Landrys in case Matt called or came home. So Christopher took it upon himself to play detective. By 7 p.m., Chris and his brother were driving out to the location where Matt's car was found. These men were so brave. This area was residential in nature. Here it is on Google Maps. I'll give you an idea of where this took place. Keep in mind this is only 2 minutes away from 7 Mile Road. This is what the area looked like for the most part, and if you keep making your way down Hayes, you'll run into 7 Mile Road and the Sunoco gas station right here. Chris and his brother searched that area for about 90 minutes before they made their way up to that Sunoco gas station. Remember, the family had not seen the video because Detective Blackwell had to wait to get an official copy that he could retain as evidence. Then he planned to show them. Well, Christopher Manning was determined to see what was on the tape, and somehow they were able to convince Moses Rahim to show them the video. And he did. Here's what they saw. A guy in a white shirt with an orange baseball cap using the ATM. At one point, he turns and faces the camera, and that's when something unexpected happened. One of the cashiers that was working that night was watching the news and had just seen that bank robbery segment. Then he caught a glimpse of the guy on the ATM video. If Chris and his brother hadn't even come in there that night to watch it at that very moment, the cashier might not have seen this video. While he meets the connection between the guy in the bank video and the one on the ATM footage, he says, that is the same guy. And sure enough, Chris and his brother agreed. Not only that, this cashier gave them a name. He said this was a local guy who came in all the time, and he went by the name IHOP. He thought he might even be a gang member and told them that's pretty much all he knew. But that was a lot. It seemed like they were moving faster than the police at this point. On that same footage, they watched this guy purchase a white t-shirt, then take off his shirt and put the new one on. He walked out of the gas station and threw the shirt away in the dumpster on site. The cashier said this was the first time he had ever seen IHOP use an ATM. He always paid in cash, never with a card. So Chris immediately walks out. He goes to that trash, and he's astonished to find that the shirt was still inside. He collects it, and he and his brother go off to canvass the surrounding area, hoping to find Matt or more clues to his disappearance. Why stop now, right? They were on a roll. But it's dark, and these brothers didn't let that scare them. They went up and down 7 Mile Road into abandoned and burned-out houses, trying to see what they could find. Armed with only a flashlight and their sheer determination, they were even stopped by some of the locals, asking them, "What are you doing here?" They confidently told them they were working on a case involving the disappearance of a young man. The person left them alone, thinking they were actual police officers. That's the air they had about them, and maybe they were pretending to be officers. I'm not sure, but all I know is nobody bothered them after that. They kept at it until around 10:30 p.m., and then they made their way back to the Roseville Police Department to hand over the t-shirt they found. The next day, back at the same department, Lieutenant Raymond Blarick is starting his day. Now, he's the one I told you about who was watching the news with the bank robbery, and he was just a concerned citizen at the time. He didn't know that the next day he would be thrown into that very case. A call came in from a man who had just been carjacked at a Walmart parking lot on 12 Mile Road. Lieutenant Blarick was one of the people called out to the scene. The responding officers didn't see the suspect when they arrived in that Walmart parking lot, but the victim and his car, a red Honda Civic, were still there. The victim said a man came up to him as he was getting into his car after shopping. The guy took out a gun and told him to get out of the car and run. So he did what he was told, but to his surprise, he looked back, and the gunman was not pulling away. He didn't know why, but he realized it was because the guy didn't know how to drive manual transmission. But there is a learning curve, and this guy never learned. He certainly didn't have time during a carjacking in broad daylight, so he fled on foot. But by that time, the owner of the Civic had already started calling 911. Well, guess what? One of the officers saw someone who looked nervous running through that parking lot, and as the person was running, a wig flew off of their head. Well, that was definitely something that piqued their interest, so they chased after him. As they got closer, the man threw a gun and a clip from out of his pocket, so police didn't even hesitate at this point. They tased the guy. Now he's under arrest, and Blarick gets a good look at him. He realizes this is the same man that he saw on that CCTV footage from the bank robbery. His name is Ihab Musalmani, but he goes by the street name IHOP. Blarick begins putting clues together, one being the green Honda that was found not too far from the Walmart the day before. Both were Hondas and involved in some type of crime. He wants to find out more, so he calls over to the Chesterfield Township Police Department. He's informed about the maps inside. Upon further inspection, a direct link is found. A literal X marks the spot. The map had an X on it, where the Flagstar Bank is located. He begins to think these incidents are all connected. Now he truly believes the carjacker from the Walmart may also have stolen Matt's car and perhaps harmed Matt or taken him somewhere. Sometimes, when these carjackings occur, the occupants are still in their vehicles. Armed with this new information, Blarick and another detective do exactly what Chris and his brother were doing the night before. They started canvassing the area where Matt's car had been found. They were hoping that Matt was still alive and being held somewhere against his will. But with 3 days having passed, the chances of Matt still being unharmed or alive were slim. That night, the Landrys are watching the news and they find out that the guy they know as IHOP from the ATM video has been arrested in connection with the Walmart carjacking. So, Doreen calls the Roseville Police Department and says, "The man who robbed the bank and is in your jail is the same man who used my son's ATM card, and my son is missing. You need to get someone in there to talk to him now." And again, Matt's family, they're the ones putting the heat on police and piecing all these things together. I can't even begin to imagine what it must have felt like for Matt's family. It's like all the signs were pointing to this guy, and yet it must seem like nothing was happening. You probably feel very helpless. Doreen was terrified because she saw that man holding a gun to Sarah in the bank, and she knew how dangerous he was. To think that this man somehow got a hold of her son's bank card, there were so many terrifying thoughts going through her mind. She shared all this with detectives. Meanwhile, Francesca and Gina, Matt's sister, are on the news pleading for someone to do something. They're also making a plea to the perpetrator saying, "Please, just bring Matt back." Gina even made a public post on Facebook telling local people to go down to the Roseville Police Department and put pressure on them to do something. To her surprise, a bunch of people did just that. They even showed up at midnight to support the Landrys. By the next day, Bob and Doreen went down there themselves to talk to detectives. What they didn't know was that the night before, after Blarick returned from searching those burned-out houses late into the night and early morning, he and his partner were already interviewing IHOP. Blarick's partner did all the talking at first, asking questions, hoping IHOP would confess to something in regard to Matt's case, but he was silent. Then, Blarick used a trick. He took a picture of Matt and put it in front of IHOP saying, "We found him." Now, he was lying, but Blarick wanted to analyze this man's reaction. He saw a look of shock come over his face, as though he had just seen a ghost, but he still remained silent. After some more questions, IHOP, whose real name is Ihab, did begin to speak, but all he said was, "I got no answer for that," and he said it at least a half a dozen times. At one point during the interview, he actually compared himself to Jesus, saying that they were going to find out the truth at the end. He claimed people didn't find out the truth about Jesus until the end, and that he would go to court to fight his case. But his coldness and heartlessness were apparent. He didn't have to speak any words for the detectives to feel that, just from his presence. Blarick relayed all of this information to the Landrys, and they were happy. They were happy that officers seemed to finally be taking their son's case seriously. There was nothing they could do but go back home and wait. Meanwhile, Gina was trying to keep people informed about Matt's story through Facebook. She gets a call from her best friend, and her friend says, "Gina, you better check your Facebook, ASAP." There was a message that came in from a woman that Gina used to go to high school with. The woman told her that her parents had called 911 on Sunday afternoon because they witnessed a carjacking, and it involved an older model green Honda. I was blown away by Matt's family being the ones piecing a lot of this evidence together. This happened in the city of East Point, which was just 4 minutes away from Roseville, where Matt was when he was last seen at Francesca's place, and where the Quiznos was. But it was where the carjacking occurred that made Gina's stomach turn. It happened behind the Quiznos, where Matt's debit card had been used last. This wasn't looking good. Gina immediately told Doreen, and they contacted Blarick with all this new information. Sure enough, a 911 call from that afternoon was found.
911 East Police.
Back of Crystal, I'm not sure, but it looks like a robbery. You got a guy cornered over here, by the neck now. I think he's putting him in the trunk. They're beating him up now. Hurry!
They were actually listening to the voice of Lawrence Wada, who was literally giving the dispatcher a play-by-play of what was happening right in front of his eyes. But by the time the police arrived that afternoon, the car was gone and Matt was nowhere to be found. Here's what Detective Blarick was able to ascertain from the information provided by Lawrence. He was driving his GMC Suburban eastbound on 10 Mile Road with his wife and daughter. As he approached the Quiznos, he saw someone he described as a black male about 35 feet away, standing around the back of the store and kind of tucking something under his waist belt. The traffic began to move forward, and Lawrence drove closer to Quiznos to get a better look. Lawrence then told his wife, "I think that guy has a gun. Lock the doors." Lawrence could see two other males standing by the guy who looked like he had a gun. Lawrence saw a dark-haired white male with his hand draped over another white male who was standing near the green Honda. The vehicle's trunk was open, and they were facing the trunk lid. Lawrence said the black male stood about 10 to 15 feet away and continued to look up and down the streets. Lawrence turned into the parking lot of a store directly across from Quiznos and informed his wife that he was going to warn the Quiznos employees about the man behind their store with a gun. He was probably going to rob the store. However, as Lawrence, very brave by the way, got out to do just that, the man with the gun looked around and made direct eye contact with him. So Lawrence immediately headed back to his car and moved it to another parking lot across from Quiznos. Still, that's when he made the 911 call, telling them there was a man with a gun who looked like he might be robbing Quiznos. At that point, there were still 3 guys on the scene. One was inside the driver's side of a green Honda with his legs out of the door, and the door open. The dark-haired white male had his hand over the top of the driver's door and one hand on the top of the roof, sort of blocking the driver inside. Blarick was almost positive that the driver was Matt Landry and that the guy with the dark hair was IHOP. They weren't sure about the third male at this point. But Lawrence went on to explain that the trunk was closed at this time. However, as you heard on the call, the man believed to be IHOP walked around to the trunk, opened it, and grabbed Matt by the neck. He put him in a headlock and attempted to drag him into that trunk. That was a really fit guy. I'm talking 6-pack abs or more. He obviously worked out. It wasn't just from his constant and impressive 200 beats per minute heavy metal music on the drums. He looked like he worked out. IHOP was unable to get Matt into the trunk, so he punched him and then tried forcing him into the driver's seat. And at this point, Lawrence was on the phone with 911, saying they're beating someone up. He said that all 3 men were inside the car, and then it sped off with a man matching IHOP's description at the wheel. Lawrence didn't just stay there. He followed the green Honda for several streets and a few turns before he lost sight of it. He kept relaying all of this information to the dispatcher as this played out. But I realized this was happening very fast, within just minutes. And that is why police did not find the car when they arrived. After gathering this new information, detectives went over to Quiznos to interview the staff that were working on Sunday, August 9th, 2009. Michael Sawyer was an assistant manager that day, and he was working with his coworker Jessica McKinney. They were both questioned about what they remembered from that day in regard to Matt Landry. Right away, Jessica let detectives know she knew Matt personally. She also took his order that day. But before Matt came in, there was an encounter with two other men that stood out. Michael said that before the men entered Quiznos, he saw them across the street in the plaza riding their bikes. A man he described as Arab American, wearing an orange baseball cap, who we know is most likely IHOP at this point, came in and asked if he could have a cup of water, which Jessica ended up helping him get. After he got the drink, he left the store with it. Shortly afterward, a young African American male walked into the store, carrying the same cup, and asked for some water. Jessica showed him where to fill up his cup. After this, Jessica said Matt came into the store and she began to take his order. He specifically mentioned that his girlfriend wasn't feeling well, and he asked if Jessica knew any kind of sub or food that would make her feel better or would be easy for her to keep down if she was feeling sick to her stomach. He cared so much. He was so proud to have a girlfriend. It's like you want to tell everyone that you meet that you love someone or that you're loved by someone. I get it, and it hurts me to think about Matt doing this right before he's confronted by these two men. But Jessica proceeded to make 2 subs for Matt. He paid, and then he left. Michael said that about 10 minutes later, the East Point police officers arrived at that store, responding to a 911 call. After interviewing the workers at Quiznos, detectives made their way to the surrounding businesses, asking to view their security footage. They got a hit. A Marathon gas station near Quiznos said they had a camera, so they pulled the surveillance footage. Detectives combed through it, and sure enough, at 5 p.m. on Sunday, August 9th, 2009, they spotted the green Honda pull in. Now they already knew that IHOP was seen at 3:30 that day at the Sunoco, so this footage was after the ATM transactions. I'm so sick of calling him IHOP, I don't know why, so I'm going to call him IHAB, because that's his name. Ehab was seen on this new surveillance, pulling Matt's green Honda into the convenience store parking lot. He got out of the vehicle and entered the store. 2 females were inside the vehicle, but no Matt inside the store. Ehab and another guy appeared to be conducting some kind of transaction. Ehab looks as though he has a pistol concealed in his waistband. 20 minutes earlier, their surveillance video shows an unidentified black male subject at the same gas station wearing the same orange baseball hat that IHOB was wearing when he was speaking to the unidentified individual. So all this is starting to make sense, especially to Francesca once she gets the news. Matt had asked her if she wanted anything to eat before he left, and considering he got 2 subs, she knew that he had thoughtfully gotten her one, even though she declined his offer. Another thing is, she had a dream before Matt went missing that he was taken and dragged into the basement of someone's house, tied up to one of those vintage heaters. Now, she was beginning to wonder if that dream was actually a premonition. Matt's family was still hoping that he's alive. Maybe he's tied up somewhere, maybe he's being kept against his will, maybe he's at a crack house somewhere on 7 Mile Road. But they just hoped he was okay. 5 days had gone by, and finally, a task force was put together to go search those exact locations. All the departments came together: Chesterfield, Roseville, the East Point Department, in addition to the Detroit Police Department's gang unit, and Dearborn, Michigan, provided canines to this task force. They were on a mission to find Matt. Now there are hundreds of these burned-out houses in Detroit at this time. Many residents would beg the mayor to do something about this, to demolish them so they wouldn't attract vagrants, drug dealers, and crime. It was Thursday, August 13th. Lieutenant Blarick and his partner, Lieutenant James Noblesdorf, entered an abandoned, burned-down home on Madeline Street, near Monarch Street, just 1 block north of 7 Mile Road. This was 2 blocks away from their Humes family Sunoco gas station. This is the street they were on. It's a rough area. They had been confronted by drug dealers all day and users. They were trying to get information about Matt and whether anyone had seen him or knew a guy named IHOP. It was there, on the street, that Blarick had just found a shiny penny, heads up, outside the last house that they had just come out of. He felt like his luck was about to change. He had made a promise to Matt's family, as a father himself, that he would not stop until he found Matt. So he and his partner entered the house at 14711 Madeline Street. If you can even call this a house, because this structure didn't even have any walls that were completely standing up. The walls were just burned through. It was just a ton of debris, and only the metal frame was there. There was garbage just strewn around the lawn. It was set way back from the street, and it looked like it could come crashing down at any minute. Yet these men did not hesitate to venture inside. Look at this place. It's completely burned out. But it was what Detective Blerick saw when he stepped inside that made him keep going. Something out of place. A flip-flop in perfect condition. As he made his way deeper inside, that's when he saw what he feared. The body of a white male with the other flip-flop still on. It had only been 5 days, but with the smoldering summer heat, the condition of the body was much more decomposed than usual for such a short time frame. Lieutenant Blerick visually examined the remains and saw what appeared to be a gunshot wound to the head. They preliminarily identified Matt from photos that they had of him. They were certain it was him. He was transported to Wayne County Medical Examiner's office for a full autopsy, and using dental records, a medical examiner confirmed that they had found the body of Matt Landry. The most important thing they had to do right now was to inform the Landrys before the media arrived. Because when they radio something like this in, many news stations listen to their radio channels to be the first to cover a story. They sent the chief of police to Matt's family's home, and as soon as Doreen saw him at the door, she already knew the news that she was going to get. She didn't even want to hear it. But after she got the news and she finished crying, she said she went straight into the shower because she just wanted to feel like she was washing away this horrific reality. Dr. Lockman Sung, an assistant medical examiner in Wayne County, performed the autopsy on Matt. The manner of death was a homicide. The cause of death, gunshot wound to the back of the head with a slightly downward trajectory. The exit wound was to the front. Ihab Musulmani was only 17 years old when he was arrested and now charged with the murder of Matt Landry. He was from Libya. He was brought over to America at 10 years old and was living with relatives, but unfortunately he suffered from neglect and he was put in the custody of the state. After being tossed around to different foster homes, he finally ran away and began living on the streets, ultimately getting involved with gangs, selling drugs, and using crack cocaine, among other illegal substances. He resorted to a life of crime to satisfy his addiction. It's a sad story, but an even sadder one for the man that he was accused of killing, poor Matt Landry. Ihab pleaded not guilty to all the crimes, that bank robbery, attempted murder, and the murder of Matt, among other things. Now the thing is, it was pretty obvious that Ihab had done this. He had been seen on the bank cameras driving Matt's car on surveillance videos at the ATM, so those crimes were more of a slam dunk. However, there was no evidence linking him to Matt's murder, no gun, no bullets at the scene. However, there were 2 spent cartridges found, one near Matt's body and the other a few houses down in a driveway. But without anything to compare them to, they couldn't concretely connect him to Matt's murder. They needed more. They also weren't convinced he acted alone, since the eyewitnesses from Quiznos, both Lawrence, who made the 911 call, as well as the staff, said there were 2 males with Matt. They needed to track down the other one. I know this is a lot of information, but I want you to know the details. I want you to know who was responsible for this. And according to Matt's friends, 2 people had to be involved. Although Matt was considered a gentle giant, he could take down anyone, and he would easily have beaten a single attacker. But 2, that would be a little more difficult. One of his bandmates was the one who said this. He was 6 feet tall and 280 pounds, and he said confidently that Matt could lay him out. Detectives started to canvass the area again, asking if anyone knew of a black male who hung out with Ihab, and sure enough, they got a name, Fat Daddy, aka Robert Taylor, a 16-year-old whose last known address was 15887 Madeline Street, the same street where Matt's body was found. They went there, but they couldn't find him. So on August 20th, they released a photo, here it is, to the media. By August 24th, he turned himself in. The first thing he said, without even being prompted, was, "I did not kill that man," referring to Matt. When he was finally taken into custody for an interrogation, he waived his Miranda rights and told detectives his version of events, starting with the Quiznos situation. Robert said he was just the lookout. He also stated that Matt went with him and Ehab voluntarily, but we know that's not true. Plus, an orange hat was found in Matt's car. When they analyzed it, it had Robert's DNA on it, linking him to being in Matt's car and an accomplice of Ehab's. According to Robert, he and Ehab were looking for a vehicle to steal that day. They rode their bikes to East Point from Detroit and did not want to ride them back because it would take too long. So that's why they wanted to steal a car. Robert Taylor described how he looked out while Ehab forced Matt into the vehicle. Then he showed Matt his gun as they drove away and threatened him. And that's all Robert Taylor would say. He said he's not guilty and stopped speaking. So now detectives go back to the streets, interviewing people in the area where Matt's body was found. They get a big break in the case from a man named Frederick Singleton. He was a crack addict who frequented the area of Madeline and Monarch, and he was able to fill in the gaps about what happened to Matt that Sunday evening. He knew both IHOP and Fat Daddy, Ehab, and Robert Taylor. Fred said it was 10 p.m. and he was outside a crack house in the area when he saw both of the men he knew as Ehab and Fat Daddy. Fat Daddy was driving and Ehab was in the back with Matt. Ehab asked Fred if he had any drugs, and he said no, but "I can get you some." All three of them got out of the Honda and went into the drug house. There were two women already inside doing drugs. At this point, Ehab gave Fred $100, and he left to go about a block away to get them some crack. He said he was only gone a few minutes. He brought back the drugs, and then Ehab, Fred, and the two ladies smoked crack while Robert and Matt sat on the couch. Fred looked over at Matt, who looked really out of place, and he asked him if he wanted some drugs. That's when Ehab interrupted, saying, "Don't worry about him, he's with me." Then Ehab pulled out more crack and Fred, the two ladies, and he smoked yet again. Fred told detectives that he left the house around 11 p.m. and he saw two guys handing Ehab a gas can. This was all they had to go on, since Robert was done talking and pleaded not guilty to the murder. The trial for both Ehab and Robert was set for September 2010. Meanwhile, remember Christopher Manning, Matt's dad's best friend? Well, months after Matt's death, on April 15th, 2010, Chris, along with some friends, drove back to 14711 Madeline, where Matt's body had been found. They were looking to find a bullet or possibly the gun that killed him. Well, Chris ended up finding a bullet lodged in a wall, so he contacted detectives and they came to retrieve this bullet. Once again, it's Matt's loved ones who are diligently trying to step up to solve this case. The bullet was compared to the firearm found in the Walmart parking lot after that carjacking, but sadly, they were not a match. However, they were about to find out what happened during the trial. Mike Sidori testified for the prosecution. He was an inmate who had been incarcerated with Robert Taylor in maximum security. They came from the same neighborhood, so they connected. Eventually, Robert told Mike the whole story. He said that he and Ehab were hitting licks, which means they were stealing, robbing, or tricking someone out of their vehicle. He told him about beating up Matt and how they all got into the car at Quiznos. In the car, Robert said that Ehab showed Matt a gun and told him what time it was, meaning they were going to kill him. We already know what happened that evening and into the night because we have Fred's story about the crack house. But it's what happened afterward that Mike helped piece together. He said Robert told him that they ultimately took Matt to an abandoned house. Once inside, he punched Matt in the face and then shot him in the back of the head, execution style. Then Robert sold the gun to someone on the streets. Neither Robert nor Ehab showed any remorse or shame during the trial. The two men were found guilty of murder in the first degree, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, carjacking, and a slew of other charges. Matt's mom talked to the media outside the courthouse, and she said that she was relieved with the verdict. However, just 2 years later, the Supreme Court ruled in 2012 that sentencing minors to a life term without parole was unconstitutional. As a result of the Supreme Court ruling, Robert and Ehab challenged their sentences. Ehab's defense attorney used his painful childhood as a reason to overturn his sentence. It's sad because they ended up having to do a resentencing hearing, and even more heinous details emerged, which Matt's family had to sit through yet again. Thankfully, neither man had been successful in any of their appeals. However, Ehab appealed again after the resentencing hearing, and it wasn't until 2016 that the court ruled against him. But sadly, that's also the year Matt's father passed away at only 64 years old. I read that in 2021, just a year ago, Ehab had tried once again to appeal his conviction, and thankfully the courts denied him again. I like to end on something positive, if possible. Matt Landry's family and friends miss him every day. When his bandmates play together or hold an instrument, they feel his presence. One thing Doreen wanted more than anything was for the homes in that Detroit area to be demolished. She begged the mayor, saying that nothing good came from that place. She pleaded with the mayor to do something about it. In 2010, the mayor started a program to do just that, and the house that Matt was killed in was demolished. I wanted to end with this. Even though Matt was a gifted drummer, his mother, Doreen, told Dateline that he was also a talented acoustic guitarist. He would practice Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven for her in his spare time. She said she would do anything to hear him strum his guitar chords again. She said that they planned to go to the Detroit Symphony before he was taken from her. Doreen and Bob wanted everyone at Matt's funeral to remember his smile and the joy that he brought to them. They wanted Matt to be celebrated for who he was. So the couple approached their priest with a very unusual request during Matt's funeral. Doreen hoped a music group or someone would be willing to perform Stairway to Heaven in the church. The priest promised that he would see what he could do and acquired a number of talented singers to sing Led Zeppelin's classic in honor of Matt's memory. The song was a fitting choice for a rock star boy who scaled the symbolic staircase well before his time.